Michael Phelps is the most decorated Olympian and swimmer of all time. He earned 28 medals, 23 of them gold. By the time of his retirement from swimming in 2016, he had won more Olympic medals by himself than 161 countries. Something that you'll learn he might have even been more proud of is that he set 39 world records over the course of his career. While Michael Phelps was very physically gifted, so were many other elite swimmers. He was able to accomplish these incredible feats because he was constantly in pursuit of ways to improve himself and his approach. The skills and techniques that he learned, he calls tools. Here's how Michael views tools in his own words.
I think we have so many more tools now than we've ever had, and we keep getting more. Like, I want to go through life with as many tools as I possibly can because I want to be prepared for anything that comes my way.
In this episode, we're going to break down all the tools that Michael Phelps used to dominate a sport like few have ever done before. Welcome to the Exponential Athlete Podcast. This is the first part of my four-part series on Michael Phelps. As I just mentioned, we're diving deep into the tools that Michael used to become the greatest swimmer and the greatest Olympian of all time. This is really interesting because Michael Phelps, like every other athlete, did not start as a finished product. There were issues that he had early in his career. He was still young. He made a lot of mistakes, but he learned from them and he developed tools and a skill set that made him resilient in every aspect of his swimming career as well as his life. So what types of tools did he collect and what are we going to touch on today? So the first is the ability to set very effective goals. The second is his skill or talent or the tool of dedication and detail orientation. Next, we're going to look into maybe his most publicized skill, which is visualization. We'll also touch on the habits and rituals that he used before, during, and after races that allowed him peace of mind, that allowed him to get into a zone, that allowed him to structure things so he could move on and attack the next thing very effectively. After that, we'll look at his ability to be curious about a lot of different things, to learn from people before him. We'll also look at the ways that he used to motivate himself, the many levers that he could pull. This, I think, is one of the most powerful and useful tools that he had. And it's also something that he was very good at, especially compared to other athletes. Finally, we'll look at data and technology and the technical techniques that he used to get ahead of his competition. Without further ado, let's jump into Michael's first tool, his ability to set goals. I'm a believer that goals are one of the bedrocks of success for athletes in general. All of the great athletes that I've studied to date set very effective goals. They each had their own spin on them, but they followed a relatively similar pattern, similar characteristics. That's why I've talked about goals in each of these series that I've done on the preceding athletes as well. It's interesting though, Michael and a lot of these other athletes, their goals don't necessarily start in concrete things. They start with a dream, not necessarily a concrete goal. And this is something Michael and his coach, Bob Bowman, are very vocal about. Michael says, "I wouldn't have medals if I hadn't had dreams first. The best part of waking up, after all, is remembering how sweet the dreams actually are." So what is the difference between a dream and a goal? I think that's very important for us to clarify. This helps us to create a really cool framework for creating dreams, creating goals, and then executing on them. So a dream is, from Michael's perspective and my perspective, a major aspiration that might not be reachable in a lifetime. It's left intentionally vague. So let's take a Kobe Bryant. His dream was to be the greatest basketball player of all time. Now, how do you go about doing that? It's hotly debated still who the greatest basketball player of all time is. So it's completely open-ended, and you can either convince yourself or do all the things that you believe you need to do to get to that position. There's no concrete roadmap. There's no I have to win X number of championships. I have to put up these specific stats. It stays amorphous in the long run. That means it's something that you can always grasp towards. Goals, on the other hand, are concrete things that we can achieve, and they're things that we largely have control over. Some goals, there's a little bit more wiggle room, and the further out you go with the goals, the closer they become to dreams. So, for example, if someone's goal is to win, like Roger Federer, is to get to number one in the world. That's a further out goal that he had when he was a kid. He did reach it relatively quickly, but he has a little bit less control over that than, say, showing up to practice every day, which could be another short-term goal. Because there are other competitors. He can't control how much practice or how good the other guys are. All he can control is himself. So what were Michael's dreams? This is Michael talking about his purpose for swimming.
How swimming is in Australia, it's like the NBA. It's like Major League Baseball. It's massive. Everybody knows them. So for me, like I wanted that here. I want that here. I think we've come so far in the last 2 decades. But, you know, like for me, I think, and I know this, USA Swimming is one of the most dominating international teams, period. Like we always win the most medals. We always break the most records. Like it's just facts. So for me, I just wanted more people to understand that and learn about it. But I also wanted to have more people involved in the sport. I wanted to grow the sport more.
As you can see, largely he wanted to get more people involved in the sport. That was a big thing for him. It wasn't necessarily about the medals. It wasn't about all of his achievement. It was about sharing the sport that he loved with as many people as possible. This is Michael talking about what 8 gold medals really meant to him. And I think it might be a surprise to some people. The notion of 8 golds was always a means to an end. It was never about chasing fame or fortune or celebrity. Never. If I could win 8, go one better than the great Mark Spitz and the 7 golds that he won in Munich in 1972, those 8 medals might do what nothing else could. They could help to make my real biggest dream, to elevate swimming's place in the American sports landscape and make it an every year sport instead of a once every 4-year sport. So Michael really cared about swimming, if you can't tell. And that goal transcended all the other things. That dream to make swimming like a football, like a baseball in the United States is what pushed him towards this greatness. It's interesting. He's also willing to compromise on overall success for his dream. And this is a really interesting story, I think. So Speedo publicized a bonus of $1 million for Michael to get 7 or more gold medals in one of the next 2 Olympics. So this was in 2004 and 2008. And this is how Michael viewed that. But the idea of $1 million was new to swimming, and we figured good for swimming. People would talk about the contract. They would mention Speedo. The buzz would give the press an extra incentive to write about swimming in advance of the Olympics, which really carries with it a narrow window of 1 in every 4 years where people can promote the sport. Peter and I talked about it and asked ourselves some important questions. Are we setting up ourselves for increased pressure? Yes. Can we handle the pressure? Yes. Will it create a buzz for swimming? Yes. So let's do it. I knew at that point that it would be almost impossible to convince the press that my goal going into the Olympics was to win 1 gold medal. Can't shoot for 1 if you publicize 7. But this was a good opportunity for me, for Speedo, and for swimming. So let's break that down a little bit. So Michael is, obviously there's this crazy financial incentive, but all this extra pressure could compromise his results in the Olympics. He might not get as many gold medals if there's this additional pressure over his head, but he's okay accepting that pressure because of what this means associated with his dream. It means that there's going to be more publicity for swimming. It means that he's going to be able to share in that and open up swimming to even more people. And that sacrifice is worth it. He says, will it create a buzz for swimming? Yes. So let's do it. That is the bottom line. That is what he is living his life by, that dream. We're going to talk a little bit about goals in a second. But as you saw here, Michael also mentioned here that his goal, even in all of the Olympics before he won a gold, was to just win 1 gold. Because you can't win 8, you can't win 23 without winning that first one. I think that tier of goal setting is really important, and we'll study that a little bit later. Looking in retrospect, did Michael change the sport? Did he achieve his dream? It's difficult to say what his standards are because it is this open-ended, vague dream now that his career is over. But Michael did have a pretty powerful impact on swimming during his career. So since Phelps' debut in the 2000 Sydney Olympics until 2010, the USA Swimming governing body saw a 24% increase in membership of year-round swimmers. Many were no doubt inspired by Phelps' dedication and competitiveness. Michael takes a lot of inspiration from Michael on this goal, Michael Jordan. He wanted to change the sport of swimming like Michael changed the sport of basketball. He says, you see, that's an achievement that will last forever, one that doesn't need a medal to commemorate it. So dreams transcend medals. They transcend individual stepping stones. To be able to say you made an impact on an overall sport, on a generation of kids, that's something that Michael puts above just winning medals themselves. which I think is really cool. That's something he can always chase no matter what. Even in retirement, he can chase that. So what were some of Michael's other dreams aside from changing the sport of swimming? One of them was to do things that have never been done before. This is something that you can always chase for your entire life, right? So he was motivated specifically by doing things in swimming that other people thought were impossible or that just weren't even thought of. So the first is swimming multiple strokes. So no one had ever swam so many events in the Olympics before. In 2008, I think he swam 16 or 17 events, something like that, which is crazy. It's a incredible wear on the body. He did the medley. He also did a bunch of different strokes, which is something that is really hard. Some of these swimming athletes specialize in one stroke, and he's trying to do all of these and compete at the highest level. And he did. Obviously, he won at the highest level. He also turned pro early. So no one in the US really did this. I believe he turned pro at 16. He was willing to sacrifice a lot of more traditional childhood and growing up and partying and going to college in order to turn pro and take this unprecedented route. He was also really obsessed with breaking world records. That's something that was really important to him. If we continue down that road, also winning 8 gold medals at one Olympics is something that nobody thought was possible. Even the greatest swimmers of his generation thought it was impossible. The only people that really believed it were Michael and his coach, Bob Bowman. Just wanting to accomplish things that other people haven't or thought were impossible, it opens the door to accomplishing the incredible feats. As Michael was growing up, when he's 16 and turns pro, I don't think he thought he could go out and win gold medals. But continually chomping at the bit, continually chasing achievements that other people didn't think were possible at ages that people didn't think he was able to do specific things, were how you open the door to accomplish this incredible feat of 8 gold medals in 2008. He's always looking for that edge of what he is personally capable of. And I think chasing that is something that never runs out of rope through our entire lives. And that is something that is, if we can shape and mold that into a dream associated with what our personal belief and what we really care about is, that's something that is worth pursuing and diving further into. Even after Michael finished his career, he still dreamed about improving water safety. This is Michael talking about how he tries not to be too specific with his goals.
I never get too specific with any of my goals, and I've always been that way. 10 years ago, I started my own foundation to help kids live healthy and active lifestyles, but also the importance of water safety. Drowning in the U.S. for children under the age of 14 is the second highest cause of death, and that's something that has to change. And we've taught over 20,000 kids to be water safe, but it's not enough. This is something that I'm going to be very greedy with and say I want more, and more kids need to be water safe. As a parent now of 2, both of our kids have been in the water a bunch. They both will know how to swim. If they choose to swim, that's their own choice. But this is something for me that we're working every day on.
So I think Michael misspoke here. I think he should be saying that he tried not to be too specific with his dreams. This is a really good segue into Michael's goals because he is unbelievably specific with his goals. But again, he is very vague with his dreams. Let's now dive into talking about Michael's goals. Obviously, we just talked about Michael's dreams, and you're going to see a little bit how they're different here. There are 3 things that really come up. So the first is he wanted to turn pro. The second, he wanted to break a world record. And third, he wanted to win a gold medal. He says, I've been waiting for this as long as I can remember having goals. 1 gold medal. That is what I thought about since 1992, the year I realized I could swim. Every time reporters ask me about trying to break Mark Spitz's record of 7 gold medals at one Olympics, I'd keep reminding them that it was my dream to win 1 gold medal. Again, you have to win 1 gold medal to win 8. You don't necessarily have to think beyond that. So Roger Federer, his goal was to reach number 1 in the world. Obviously, that's a very big, ambitious goal, but he didn't think about winning 14, 18 major championships. He thought about getting to that world number 1, and then he thought about reassessing after that. That's the power of creating these audacious goals, is that you can achieve them, you prove something to yourself, and then you can take on something even more crazy, even more ambitious. A reporter says, Michael, how many gold medals can you win? Someone asked. Michael said, anything is possible. I don't think you should ever talk about things you can't do. The reporter said, Michael, what'll it take to win 7 gold medals? He says, well, I have to have the best meet of my career, but I'd be happy with 1 gold medal. So this is rhetoric he is continuing to say. He is telling himself this, but he's also, if you're reading into this statement, he's never ruling himself out. He's focusing on his individual goal, but he's leaving the door open for this future success, which I think is really important for us to always do. This allows Michael to continually redefine excellence. He achieves something, he can go on and achieve something even greater each time. And obviously this evolves over time. Once Michael has that first gold medal, he has to reevaluate and try to get that second gold medal, that third gold medal, that fourth gold medal, all the way up to that 23rd gold medal. You'll also hear his coach, Bob Bowman, talk about how getting a medal isn't necessarily a good metric. And this is something that him and Michael worked on over time. So after winning that first gold medal, even though he would like to win 8 gold medals, Michael framed a lot of his practice, a lot of his lifestyle, not around winning medals, but about setting world record times. World record times are things he has complete control over, whereas medals, someone else could just swim a better race. They could bring a better version of themselves that day. Setting and swimming and practicing to set these record times, generally, if he does that, he's going to win the medals anyway. And that's a lot more of a concrete thing for him to focus on. So all these big picture goals, they're aligned with his dreams overall. And these big picture goals, they can be a little bit broader, a little bit more vague than what we're going to talk about now, which are his short-term goals. So setting goals overall was originally a habit that he got from his coach, Bob Bowman. Again, we're going to talk all about Bob Bowman in episode 2 and 3, but this is a nice teaser to see how intense and specific Bob can be. He said, take this paper home and put it on your refrigerator. You'll see it every day. That summer at the 1999 Junior Nationals in Orlando, I didn't win any events. In the 1500, I swam 16:008. I was off by 0.08 of a second from my goal. In the 400 IM, I swam 4:31.68 precisely on the number. In the 200 fly, I swam 2:04.68 precisely. In the 200 fly time, I was nearly 10 seconds better than the best time I had done in practice about 6 weeks beforehand when Bob had ordered a set of 3 200 flies as a tune-up. So Michael, for these individual races, these short-term goals, is setting the exact times to the 100th of a second of what he wants to get. And he's hitting them to 100th of a second, which is absolutely crazy. This is obviously something that over his career, he's worked with his coach to refine. And Bob, his coach, got him started on this, but he really made this his own. He was eventually setting the times that he thought was possible with input from Bob. I wrote the sheet that lay out my goals for 2008 a few weeks after coming back from those 2007 World Championships in Melbourne. In the 100 free, I wanted the Olympic year of 2008 to go 47.50. In the 200 free, I wanted to go 1:43.5. In the 100 fly, I wanted to go 49.5. In the 200 fly, I wanted to go 1:51.1. In the 200 IM, I wanted to go 1:53.5. And the 400 IM 4:05 flat. There's more on the sheet, other races, as well as split times for every single race. Think about how detailed he is. And we go back and where he said he didn't want to set too specific goals. Very clearly, we see now that he's talking about dreams because these goals are unbelievably specific. If we look at this on a continuum, the short-term goals, I believe they have to be the most specific, very, very concrete. The longer-term goals can be a little bit more vague, and then the dreams can be unbelievably vague. They can be completely open-ended. This is Michael, in his own words, talking about the detail of the splits, the specific goals over his career.
So for me, I started with little times, and once I hit those times, I just instantly changed them and made them super fast and tried to get them again. But they were broken down into splits, like detailed splits by each 50.
So we've talked about dreams, long-term goals, and short-term goals. How does Michael actually go about setting these specific goals himself? There's a philosophy behind this. There's also an implementation aspect to this. He says, if you put a limit on anything, you put a limit on how far you can go. I don't think anything is too high. The more you can use your imagination, the faster you go. If you think about doing the unthinkable, you can. The sky is the limit. That's one thing I definitely have learned from Bob. Anything is possible. I deliberately set very high goals for myself. I work very hard to get there. The first thing about Michael setting goals is he sets really ambitious goals, things that he believes he can achieve, but are very, very difficult. When he's thinking about his dreams, when he's thinking further down that pipeline, he's even more ambitious. He's using his imagination. He's constantly thinking about what's possible. The beauty of his goal setting is that it evolves. Once he achieves something, he is constantly looking for what he can achieve next and how he could make it possible. The more ambitious a goal you set, the more creative you have to be to get there. If that goal is outside of your current capabilities, you have to think of a way that is non-conventional to get there. And Michael is a master of doing that. Michael's coach, Bob Bowman, also played a huge role in that. Michael also uses a really interesting framework for creating and setting his goals. And this is him talking about that now.
You come up with a dream, you figure out how you're going to get there, and you go for it. Like, what's the worst that happens? You fail? Great. Get up and do it again.
So if we think about this framework, dream, plan, reach, it's almost exactly what we described in the last 10 minutes or so of me talking. So dreams, they're these ambitious things. Planning is creating those long-term and short-term goals, and reaching is now executing and putting that effort into achieving those goals. We're going to go deep into that in the next section, which is focused on dedication. Honestly, the way Michael describes this, it is very simple, but it is not easy. A lot of hard work has to go in, a lot of planning and thinking about these goals and thinking about what you can achieve now and what you can achieve in the longer term. And I think a lot of people just set goals and kind of forget about them, or they set them at the beginning of the year and they don't iterate on them. Goals should have a little wiggle room, right? If you're planning to go out and do something and you fall short, it makes sense to reassess and reevaluate. If you absolutely blow through your goals, you probably made them too easy. And there is a right level that you should be setting these goals. There is some scientific research around this. I will link it in the description. I believe I have to refresh myself that you want to hit your goals. I think it's between 30 and 50% of the time. So they should be really hard where you actually don't succeed 100% of the time. But you shouldn't fail every time, or else you're going to get really disappointed and you're going to want to give up. And so finding that middle ground is really, really important. I'm really going to beat this goal hierarchy to death. So these dreams that you never reach, the long-term goals that are very difficult. So Michael set long-term goals generally in 4-year cycles around the Olympics. And then short-term goals, Michael concretely set around each individual meet that he would have coming up. He could set these annually, monthly, or even weekly, depending on what he had. He would also set individual goals for each practice, and Bob would help him with that. So we can get down to every single level of time, and Michael probably has a goal associated with it. There's also sub-goals, which I think are very interesting. So not just looking at what he wants to do in a race, but how he wants to compete in the race. So he might have a goal of performing at a certain time within the butterfly of an IM. That to him is something that he would even break things down even more to. This is Michael talking about this idea of sub-goals.
You can't win 8 without the first, right? So again, it's back to that process of one race at a time. Like I know the 400 IM, it's right out of the gate. Like I got to be ready. And then it's the relay, the 4x1 free relay, right? 8 100s, we win that by. So it's like all of these things have to go perfectly for it all to work. Winning the 100 fly by 100th of a second, the smallest margin of victory. Like, it's just crazy. When you really break it down and think about it, it's hard to comprehend.
Again, probably the best example that I've used a couple times is winning 1 medal before you can win 8. 1 medal is the sub goal of the 8 medals in Beijing. And getting to that point, he again could not have gotten to 8 without that first one. Here's another example from the 400 IM in Beijing, where I really won the race. And what made me happiest was that I had dominated the breaststroke. All the practice, the focus, the effort on the breast had paid off. Che was more than 0.3 of a second slower over the 100 meters. Lotke's breast leg was more than a second behind me. So he is really excited about the sub goal within the breaststroke that he created and that he had dominated. And I think that is just a perfect example of that. Another aspect, again, that we'd alluded to a little bit was focusing on the controllables and short-term goals. So short-term goals are focused on specific times. They're focused on world records and not focusing on other people. They're as concrete as possible. Other people absolutely could motivate him. He could use them to push himself, but he wasn't worried about what they were doing. He was worried about hitting his specific times. Another aspect that you'll see was a huge part of Michael achieving and paying attention to his goals was that he wrote them down. He says, every year since I've been swimming competitively, I've set goals for myself in writing. The goal sheet was mandatory. I got used to it and it became a habit. When I was younger, I used to scribble my goals out by hand and show each sheet to Bob. I usually kept my original paper version by the side of my bed. The two of us are the only ones who have it, who ever got to see it. The goal sheet was famously secret for a long time, until now. I didn't look at the sheet every day. I pretty much memorized it. How fast I wanted to swim and what I had to do to get there. So there, he's not saying that he didn't look at it every day. He literally looked at it so much every day that it was purely in his memory. How fast I wanted to swim and what I had to do to get there. If there was a day when I was down, when I was not swimming well, when I simply felt tired or grouchy, I would look at it. It was definitely a pick-me-up. Pretty soon after I made my first goal sheet, I hit every one of the times to a 1/10 of a second, precisely. Exactly. It's like I have an innate body clock. I don't know how or why I was able to do this. I just could. And I often still can. It's another way in which Bob says I'm different and always have been. So this is Michael talking about how his goals have just been plastered everywhere for him to see every day.
Basically in my closet or next to my bed, so I could see them every single day, because there were days where I didn't want to get out of bed. There were days where I'm sore, I can't move, I don't want to swim, I'm tired, I don't feel well, this, that, the other. So I just had them there because I had to have some idea of what I was doing every single day, and I needed to visually see that.
So you can see from Michael there, a big part of staying on top of his goals is just having them present in his life every day. This was a huge takeaway that I've had from Michael, from my talk with Shane Battier, from a lot of the other athletes that I've studied, from Tiger Woods. They all had their goals visible to them every day. Just because they're the most important thing to you doesn't mean having constant reminders about their importance and what you need to do to get there isn't important. Just having those subtle reminders, the best athletes in the world have to remind themselves of their goals every day. That to me says a lot about the importance of just writing these things down, making them accessible. For myself, I write it on my bathroom mirror. I have them on my refrigerator. I have a whiteboard in my office with the things I want to achieve. And it makes it really hard to forget those things. Another aspect of the goals of Michael's, which I just mentioned before, is that they're famously secret. He says, the only person who could help me accomplish my goals was Bob. No offense to anyone in the media, but is a reporter going to help me swim faster? Is the reporter going to help me win any medal of any kind? That's why I kept everything to myself. It wasn't necessary to share my goals with anyone but Bob, so I didn't. It's interesting. I actually looked relatively deep into the science here. It is better not to share your goals with the world. It's better to share them maybe with a close confidant that can help you. But essentially, when you make a goal public, it gives you a premature sense that you've already accomplished it just by talking about it. This is research by Peter Gallwitzer. Hopefully, I'll have him on the podcast. But to me, this is very interesting. Michael's doing absolutely the right thing by not talking about these things. You can talk about them after they've happened publicly, but not before they've happened. Now, the last thing I want to talk about related to goals is what happens after you fall short of your goals, because that does happen. And I think that that's not talked about enough. A lot of the time we talk about achieving and hitting them, but I just said, 5 minutes ago that your goals should be hard enough that you shouldn't make them all the time. Although Phelps could still win 6 gold medals in Athens, the Associated Press reported, his audacious challenge fell short and could result in him being remembered as something of a failure at the Athens Games. Michael says, I knew I was not a failure in any way. So did those close to me. It doesn't matter if you fall short. It's never a failure to go after your goals with everything you've got. Will it crush him? No, my mom said in the same AP story. He's already got a page in the history book. So if we think about what happened in Athens, he did win 6 gold medals and then I believe 2 other medals. So he won 8 medals. He just didn't reach the record that Mark Spitz had set. And I love how Michael phrased that. If you are chasing your goals, if there's something you want and you're going after it with everything you have, you're already winning. You're already doing more than a lot of other people. And that in itself is a victory. You're also, by failing a goal, learning an incredible lesson about what you have to do to get back and maybe reach your goal the next time. Related to that, Michael is someone who, if he doesn't achieve his goals, is immediately in the lab thinking about how to achieve them in the next iteration. People would ask me, is it a disappointment not to win 7 golds? I would say, I won 8 medals. How is that disappointing? At the same time, I had a new measuring stick. that 200 free. I didn't yet know how good I could be. There was obviously more to do to get me to deliver my best. Between Athens and Beijing, as Bob and I mapped out the plan to get to 2008, we had 3 major meets that would test how far I could come. The 2005 World Championships in Montreal, the 2006 Pan Pacs, and again in Canada, this time out west in Victoria, and the 2007 World Championships in Melbourne. So Michael isn't necessarily thinking about, oh, I lost. He's thinking about, oh, how can I get better so I don't lose again? I'll also say in this Athens Olympics, in the 200 free, he's swimming against Ian Thorpe, who was by far the best freestyler, maybe of all time. I believe Michael did end up breaking his record, but at that time, he was unbelievable in the field. And Michael swam in the 200 free instead of the 200 back because he wanted to face the greatest competition ever. So maybe Michael could have kind of rolled over on it and won 7 gold medals by going into a race that wasn't necessarily against what he deemed to be the best competition, but he wanted to win these 8 gold medals by taking on, or the 7 gold medals at that time, by taking on the best. And to me, that's something that says a lot about who Michael is, but it also says a lot about the mindset is goals aren't there just for us to hit them. There's context within the goals. The goals are yours. You can make them whatever you want. But for Michael, for the greatest athletes, their goals are not just to necessarily win. Their goals are to win and take on the greatest competition. Their goals are to beat everyone by setting these world records. I'll also say it's okay to be angry if you don't achieve the things you want. Michael says, my time, 1:55.26, was the second fastest in the world in 2005. But to me, it was just another effort that fell short, this time by more than a second. I took off my cap, flung it in front of me, and turned around and slapped the wall in disgust. I don't usually do that, and it isn't something Bob approves of, but I was ticked. I remember thinking, Bob is going to drop a bomb on me. He's going to put a hurt on me in training. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew I needed it. I was still only 20, and I refused to believe that my best wasn't still ahead of me. At this point in time, Michael doesn't hit his the time that he believes he's capable of, and he's upset, but he's using that anger as motivation, and he's pushing that into training. He's pushing that into the future. He's able to take that energy that he has. I mean, if you think about anger is just a form of energy that we're releasing, and he's pushing it into something meaningful and proactive. Michael also has goals after swimming, and I think that that's important to talk about. He has struggled tremendously with mental health. That's what we're going to talk about in part 4 of the series. And this is him, in his own words, talking about what his goals have been like after he stopped swimming.
It's challenging, and a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. But it's kind of fun to be able to think in the future for your kids and what you want for them. What I want for my wife and I, what I want for business, what I want in all of these different ways. So I'm still working in that quad form, but it's just not in times.
I wanted to end this section by talking about something I believe to be interesting, is how Michael feels about his medals after the fact. He says, it's funny, but people ask where the medals are now and what I plan to do with them. And I don't really know the answer to either question. Peter has them somewhere. The medals are really only important if you can think about what it took to get them in the first place. So all these goals, they're there in order for us to push what we're capable of. When we look back in retrospect, it's all of the things that we've done, the effort that we put in, the development that we've made as people, the mark that we've left on the world that's really going to be important. It's not necessarily going to be a piece of metal that is in someone's closet somewhere. I think that viewing goals through that lens is something that's very exciting and healthy. And I see far too often that people get too wrapped up in the hardware. It's about the accomplishment of putting in the hard work, thinking about doing something and achieving it. That's where the magic happens. So as we think back about this very long section on goals, I would ask everyone listening, and this question is also addressed to myself, is how can we set better goals? So can we create this framework where our short-term goals are aligned with our long-term goals, which are aligned with our dreams? What are your individual dreams? I don't think people spend enough time thinking about what their dreams are. A lot of people might say, hey, I just want to be good at basketball. I want to get to college. I want to play at this next level. But they don't usually think beyond that. And I think having a big picture aspiration or goal is something really important. But those are really hard to think about. Those are really difficult conversations and thoughts to have with yourself. And you generally have to push yourself and exhaust a lot of mental energy to think about those things. But at the end of the day, it is worth it because it gives you purpose. It gives you something beyond just these tasks that you do every day. And then after you have your dreams, after you've thought about that and made it concrete, what are the intermediary controllable goals that can help you get closer to them? Now, all of these goals are very useful. They're powerful, but they don't really mean anything if you don't work towards them. The next tool that Michael developed in order to achieve these goals was absolute dedication to his craft. And we're going to dive deep into dedication here. We've heard and read a lot about how Phelps was born to swim. His elongated torso, large feet, and massive hands are a racer's dream combination. But to understand what makes him so phenomenally successful, you have to know the level of his dedication. In the year leading up to the Athens Games, Phelps took just one day off from training. That includes weekends, and it was the day his wisdom teeth were removed. In the 4 years since his dominance in Greece, his coach says he somehow found a way to step up his intensity another notch. Like Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods, two athletes he's sometimes compared to, Phelps has the most talent compared to his peers. But like that esteemed pair, he wins so often because he understands that while talent is huge, hard work takes it to other levels. This is Michael talking about his training 7 days a week.
There was no blueprint for me to do what I was trying to do, right? So we had to approach it in a completely different way. Nobody in the swimming world was swimming 7 days a week. But if you swim 7 days a week, if you don't swim 7 days a week, when you take off Sunday, you're not back to where you were on Saturday until Tuesday. So I'm getting 2 days out of every single week, more than any of my competitors are.
So I'm not a proponent of overtraining. I'm not necessarily a proponent of the idea of no days off. If you can do it and stay energized and not burn out from swimming, I think that it could be worth it. If you can do it without taking an incredible toll on your body, it could be worth it. What I think the deeper message in him training 7 days a week is that in order to get different results from other people, you have to do different things. And his way of breaking the mold, his way of getting different results was by swimming 7 days a week. I think, again, this broader message of what can you do that your opponents aren't doing, whether it's putting in more work without breaking down your body, whether it's trying something different, taking a different approach, that could also be very effective. So it could be maybe technology you're using. It could be a lot of these different things. The way you're training, not necessarily how much you're training, that is how you fundamentally get better. All of the athletes that I've studied that are the greatest at their sport were rule breakers. They broke the convention. They did things that other people weren't doing, and that's what made them successful. I really took that to heart from studying this. But in order to do things different, you have to be constantly thinking about your craft. You have to master the basics and be able to iterate on them. Dedication is a big part of doing things different and making those changes actually work. This is Bob, his coach, on his practice schedule. He was practicing 7 days a week, and that meant that he was training on as much as 50 more days a year than his competition. Now just do the math. Over a 4-year cycle leading up to an Olympics, Michael swam 200 days more than his primary competition. One day he said to me, "Bob, we're getting 5 years of training into everyone else's 4 years. Not too shabby." Now, for sure, we didn't swim every day. For instance, we took Christmas off. Well, let me rephrase that. We used to take Christmas off. Again, I won't deny that putting in more practice time healthily absolutely gets you ahead. There's a great quote in a conversation with Kobe Bryant where he talks about how it's just math. And we'll play that now.
It's a simple thing of math. If you want to be a great player, if you play every single day, 2-3 hours, every single day, over the course of a year, how much better are you getting? Most kids will play maybe, an hour and a half, 2 days a week. Not gonna get it done, right? So if you're obsessively training 2-3 hours every single day over a year, over 2 years,
you're going to accelerate.
You make quantum leaps.
Another aspect of practicing and getting all this work in is consistency. So not every day is going to be a great day, but a bad day in the pool, if you're not injuring yourself or doing anything negative, is better than a good day somewhere when you're not training. And this consistency is a huge part of Michael's career. He's constantly putting in work, he's putting in time, and he's conditioning himself to get used to these difficult workouts regularly. He is shaping and changing his body. Not just his body, though, it's also his mind, which I think is an interesting aspect of these grueling hours, all this time that he's putting in. Someone asked, do you ever take a day off? You must take Christmas off, right? Michael looked at me. I looked at him. Nope, we practice on Christmas too, Michael told the guys. Their faces turned yellow. When we got off the bus, Michael whispered to me, I guess we're going to keep swimming on Christmas because these guys think we're nuts. Yeah, we definitely are, Bob said. We both started laughing. After this, they started swimming on Christmas for about 6 years until they came to their senses. But the mental advantage that you create from putting in more work than your opponents is also very important. If you know you can go somewhere where they haven't, if you know that you're putting in and doing things that your opponents aren't, how can you not feel confident when you're racing them or when you're competing against them? You know you're more prepared, and that psychological advantage definitely carries you a long way. Here's Michael talking about his preparation for Beijing in 2008.
We had all the tools that we needed at that point to be able to compete at that level at every single race. During that week in Beijing, I think I swam 60,000 meters. So during a regular training week, I was swimming 80 to 100,000 meters. I had to be extremely prepared, and that week took 8 years to get prepared for.
What I love about this is that he talks about how that week took 8 years to get prepared for. There's a long-term vision of this work. He's able to put in all this work every day because he knows all this work is accumulating and building towards these individual events. The hard work you put in every day, it pays dividends over the course of your career. And thinking about your goals, thinking about things in the long term allows you to dedicate every single day in a very different way. And dedication is also about priorities. So it's putting your training, putting your sport, putting the things that you care about in front of maybe some other extraneous things. Being great, to some extent, is about what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're willing to put first compared to some of the other aspects in your life. Bob Bowman, his coach, uses a great metaphor, which is associated with putting money in the bank. And here's Michael talking about that.
We would call it putting money into the bank. So at the end of the year, when we had a major international competition, we could withdraw that money that we had saved throughout the year. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you, there were a lot of days where I did not want to get out of bed.
I think this is an incredible metaphor for taking the long-term approach in training. It also gives meaning to every day's work that you put in. If you're always accumulating funds and then you can take this withdrawal when you're going to compete, every single day has meaning. I love metaphors. I've talked at length in the Tiger Woods series about how important metaphors are. This is among one of the best metaphors that I've seen for getting athletes to really understand the importance of the practice they're putting in every day. Here's a couple small examples of prioritization, which I thought really spoke a lot about Michael and his mindset and his approach to dedication. On Friday, August 8th, was the day of the opening ceremony. Much as I would have loved to have gone to the ceremony, there was just no way. I had to swim the next day, and I couldn't run the risk of marching and then standing in the heat and humidity. So Michael's at, I believe this is the 2008 Olympics. And because he has such an incredible workload, he has to swim a lot of races to win 8 gold medals. He's forgoing something that's very meaningful to a lot of the athletes, marching in the ceremony and being a part of that in order to prepare himself for the races and the competition that he has to do. Another thing that Michael prioritized in a different way was developing before weightlifting. So everything I accomplished in the pool leading up to and through Athens had been done without doing any serious weightlifting. When I was growing, Bob had been particularly worried that weight work might do more harm than good. It might well lead to a serious injury. There was a good reason for that. I'm double jointed in my knees, my ankles, and my elbows. I was especially as a teenager. Awkward out of the pool, clumsy even. Bob finally ordered me to stop jogging because I couldn't even do that without running the risk of tripping over my own feet. There's a good reason for Michael not necessarily lifting early enough. I think usually it's the other way around. A lot of athletes don't start lifting early enough now. But in Michael's case, they wanted to wait till he developed more, till he got more coordinated in order to start weightlifting. There's a chance if he started lifting earlier, he could have picked up some speed gains, but that comes at the risk of him potentially getting injured and missing time. Something that you see in a lot of sports is that the more time, the less injuries you have, the more you take care, and maybe you don't practice as intense, but you practice more, you actually get these returns. And one way you can practice more is not getting injured. And so Bob and Michael decided that this was a better way, and they put that off until they felt that he was ready. When he was ready to start doing more out of pool work, it really paid its dividends. In this race, the weight work I'd done really showed. I had more endurance. I could hold a stronger kick. The dolphin kick had become more or less a fifth stroke. I now had developed incredible power off the turns, and in particular, that third turn. What once had been a vulnerability was now a killer asset. 12 or 13 meters underwater, enough to help reshape the contours of what was possible in the 200 free. So again, he gets these long-term gains by waiting. Even though there was potential short-term gains, they definitely weren't worth the risk of injury for him. And a lot of us don't think about our success in the long term. We think about, hey, can I make the team? Hey, can I have a great season this season? A lot of these great athletes that I'm studying, they're willing to sacrifice a little bit in the short term to have this benefit in the long term. A good example of this is Kobe Bryant. So when he was a kid, I believe when he was around 13, he basically had a terrible season. He didn't score a single point over the course of an entire season, but he was still working hard. He was still working on the moves that he just physically wasn't able to do yet. When he grew a little bit, well, he was already tall. When he put on some muscle, when he developed more coordination, he was able now to execute these moves that he'd been practicing. He had to wait and be patient for everything to click, and it eventually did for him. He suffered that short-term loss, absolutely sucking for a season when he was in junior high, but sucking meant that he could play at an even higher level later. This is Michael talking about why he is willing to make the sacrifice of not taking any days off.
5 or 6 straight years without missing a single day. So 365 days of the year. Doesn't matter a holiday, a birthday, if I'm sick, this or that, it doesn't matter. I was in the pool because that's what I wanted. I wanted to make that sacrifice to do something that nobody else was doing, to give me the opportunity to potentially do something that nobody else has ever done. And I didn't care what I had to do to get there. I was willing to swim every day.
The last part of dedication that I want to focus on is details. So it's one thing to show up. It's one thing to work on the things that are fun. But a lot of the time, great athletes have to work on things that they find drudgery, or the little smallest things that aren't necessarily obvious, how they make you good, how they help to advance you. In swimming, in a lot of these sports, it's a game of inches, of centimeters, of seconds, and these little things make an incredible difference. This is Michael talking about how details mattered for him.
Every single session, every single stroke mattered. The smallest, finest details you could possibly think about. You know, we had to think, or we had to go through and fine tune daily. I almost talk to it as like you're going to college, and the top level is the 10,000 level class or the 1,000 level class, whatever the hell you want to call it. You know, if you skip a few of those classes, like you're missing key steps that are going to help you at the very top level when the lights are on, when, you know, you might have had a bad night's sleep, or your roommate might be sick, or maybe the food in the dining hall wasn't very good, or your air conditioning doesn't work.
I see an incredible parallel in Michael Jordan and in Kobe Bryant, where they talk about the importance of fundamentals. Kobe is talking constantly about footwork. He said that he learned a lot of this footwork from Michael Jordan. There's all these flashy things that these athletes do, but the fundamentals, the little details, the spacing, the footwork, in swimming, the angle of the stroke, breathing, all these things are really important and they add up. If you think about it in swimming, if you're doing the same stroke over and over again, let's say 15, 16 times a lap, if you make one error or you do something inefficiently on each of those strokes, it adds up over the course of the entire swim. Same thing with any of these sports. These small details that you're doing repeatedly, they compound, and if you get them right, you're saving a lot of time in every single, or a little bit of time in every stroke, and they add up. Practicing the details like this isn't always fun, but I'm a firm believer that these are the things that separate the greats from the greatest. I had a great interview with Jim Furyk, and he's talking to me about how often he practices his setup. A lot of people think they're practicing their swing plane, all of these types of things. Jim is sitting there practicing his setup as much as he possibly can, because that's one of the fundamentals for him. We're going to, again, go in depth in part 2 and 3 about how Bob Bowman is focusing on the details. He might be the biggest stickler for the details of anyone I've ever seen. And I think that's a good thing. Maybe it's not always the athlete's job to focus on the details. It could be the coach's job as well. I will say, I don't think you necessarily have to be as dedicated to the craft as Michael Phelps to be successful in your craft, but his dedication is without a doubt something that has separated him from his peers. And figuring out a way to dedicate yourself in a similar way, or to steal some of the ways that Michael dedicates himself, can be very effective. I want to add actually a little section here. I think dedication is one of the bedrocks of mental toughness, and focusing and doing the same thing every day is something that can build that mental toughness over time. At the highest level of sports, especially at the Olympics, you have to expect that everyone competing against you has physical talent. So how do you channel peak performance into championship performance? You have to be mentally tough. That's how. How do you get to be mentally tough? You have to train your mind just like you train your body. Unleash your imagination, work hard, embrace obstacles, difficulties, and mistakes. So by working on the details, by showing up every day, Michael is also training mental toughness. Another way to practice mental toughness is to train through safe pain. You have to be dedicated in order to work through pain. Absolutely. The 400 IM is tougher still because it's all 4 strokes at a distance. It requires strength, endurance, technique, and versatility. The race can make you hurt bad. Your shoulders start to burn, your legs ache, you can't get a breath. The pain is sometimes dull, throbbing. It's like your body isn't even in the unbelievably great shape it's in. All you want is for the pain to stop. Who is mentally toughest? That's what the 400 IM is all about. I won the 400 IM at the 2003 World Championships in Barcelona in what was then a world record time of 4:09:09. Again, practicing through this safe pain. I say safe pain because you don't want to do more damage than you can recover from. There is pain that you can go to, which is pain in your lungs, pain on your body, like Michael's describing in this race, that, again, you're going to recover from. Pushing through something that is going to detract from your training in the future is not safe pain. On the other hand, you can practice going into this safe pain zone where your muscles are screaming, your lungs are screaming, and being comfortable in that zone is one way that you can get an advantage in a lot of sports. Another way to build this mental toughness is to do things that you don't want to do. So one thing that separates Michael from other swimmers, Bob likes to say, is that if they don't feel good, they don't swim good. That's not the way it is for Michael. Michael, he says, performs no matter how he's feeling. He's practiced it a long time. He knows exactly what he wants to get done, and he's able to compartmentalize what's important. Bob, with his seemingly endless collection of sayings, naturally has an acronym to describe the mental aspect of racing. It's WIN. What's important now? By showing up at practice every day, I don't think there's any doubt that Michael doesn't always want to be there. But by showing up and putting in his work and trying to do his best in practice every day, he is training that muscle of being able to function, work, and compete when he doesn't always want to be there. And that is, again, something that you can practice and develop. Michael says, if I wasn't in the right mood for practice, I got myself into the right mood. I'm not saying that Bob and I didn't disagree, even argue with each other. Of course we did. But I got myself into a place I needed to be to get that work done that I needed to get done. And he did this by just practicing this again every day. He's practicing when he's not in the mood to go swim, get in the pool. There's inevitably going to be a race that is a competitive race that he goes into where he doesn't feel up to it. And he can now leverage the practice from getting in the right mindset and practice into that individual race. So the third part of mental toughness, I believe, is making sacrifices to compete. So understanding and prioritizing that we talked a little bit earlier. This is Michael talking about work versus physical ability.
A lot of it is, to prepare for an Olympic Games, it takes really 4 years to mentally and physically prepare yourself. For me, I was always the kind of person, like, I knew what I had to do in the pool. And if I got that done, I would tune myself up mentally throughout that just naturally, because it's what I've been doing as a kid, since I was a kid. That was something that my coach taught me at a very, very young age. And it just became natural.
What I really like about this is that Michael, he avoids the word can't. This is not a part of his vocabulary. He is capable of everything. He just has to find the way. He might not want to, but he won't tell himself that he can't. To me, this is one great way to get around a lot of the psychological boundaries we create for ourselves. So as I end this dedication section, I want to think a little bit about what mental toughness is. So again, it's persevering through pain, doing things that you should do, even though you don't want to do them, and then not being fazed or distracted by outside forces in training or practice. Focusing on the priorities, making the necessary sacrifices. I would ask everyone listening, how dedicated are you to your craft? I'm not saying that you have to practice necessarily dramatically more than your other peers, but what are you doing that they aren't? How are you viewing your sport? How are you practicing? How are you thinking about it differently than they are? I think that's a big part of dedication. Are you showing up? Are you prioritizing? Are you making the necessary sacrifices to get ahead? What are you willing to sacrifice? What aren't you willing to sacrifice? These are all important questions that I think people forget to ask themselves. I'll also say that I think you unlock a lot of potential by asking yourself these difficult questions. It's really easy to say, oh, I'll think about it later. What I'm doing is working. But the way that you shake something free, the way you make a advancement, the way that you get to the next level, it's usually not physical. It's a psychological boundary that you get past. Or when you make a big jump, you make these tiny incremental physical advances every day if you're dedicated. But I implore you to think about these things a little bit more. One tool that I think is really powerful for getting past these boundaries, for thinking about things differently, is visualization. And Michael might be one of the all-time greats at using visualization and taking things that he visualizes and turning them into a reality. We're going to touch on this tool next. At an Olympic final, everybody has physical talent. So who's going to win? The mentally toughest. Bob is a big believer in that. I am too. Bob also believes that my visualization skills carry over to my training and to my racing, and it's part of what makes me different. This is Michael talking about why he visualizes. I thought this was kind of mind-blowing. Definitely changed my perspective of visualization in general.
Getting up behind the block and just racing, I can't control what anybody else does. So for me, I want to know how the race could go, how I don't want the race to go, and in a perfect world, how the race should go. Because it all goes back to preparation. If you're not preparing yourself before the meet, you're not going to get a time you deserve. So for me, I have to make sure I'm doing all the work leading up to a big meet so that I get behind the block and I don't have to think about anything else.
So for Michael, to reiterate, visualization is a way for him to prepare and to control as many variables as possible. So he thinks about how it could go, how he wants it to go, what could go bad, and also how he would fix it if it goes bad. And again, this frees him up to be completely relaxed because he's gone through all of the scenarios. Many of us, including myself, I only think about visualizing how things go right. I'm only thinking about, okay, if this went perfect, this is how I want it to go. The idea of visualizing how things could go wrong and how you can fix them is a very powerful concept. And it taps into this idea called if-then planning. So if-then planning, we create a game plan for if things don't go the way we want, and we can be more at ease in the moment because we have a game plan. We have something to fall back on if things don't go well. I love this use case for visualization. Just again, looking at the negative things that could happen and how you resolve them. It's not good to just visualize the bad stuff. He's actively visualizing how to fix the problems. And this to me is one of the keys that made him so great at visualization. He's using his mind to plan for all the scenarios, and then he's able to relax. He's able to get in the right headspace before every race because there aren't any intangibles. There aren't any variables that he hasn't already thought of. Here's some examples from Michael talking about how visualization had helped him.
When I would visualize, I visualize every single, getting up to a meet, I would visualize probably a month or so in advance, just of what could happen, what I want to happen, and what I don't want to happen. Because when it happened, I was prepared for it. So, when I go into 2008 and in the 200 fly, my goggles fill up with water the first 25 and I swim blind for 175 meters, I revert back to what I did in training and counted my strokes. This time around, I go up to put my cap on for the 800 free relay and it rips. So naturally, I know that I can't represent somebody else's name. So I have to turn the cap inside out. It's just something that I've always been prepared for. It was something my coach did from a very young age and continued to try to just improve that game step by step.
So now that we see how Michael uses visualization, what does visualization for him look like? How did he learn this process? How can you potentially learn this process as well? So where did it start? He says, when I was 13 or 14, Bob started asking me to play a race in my head as though it were a video. When we were training, we'd get to the last repetition of a set, particularly a really hard set. And Bob would want me to see that last repeat close to race speed. He'd say, okay, put in the tape and see yourself, for instance, swimming the 400 individual medley at the Nationals. To this day, if Bob says, okay, put in the videotape, that's what he means. This is another metaphor. I will continue to stress how important metaphors are in learning for accessing our potential of our brain. In one of the later episodes here, I talk with Dr. Grandner, who is a sleep expert, and he described to me how metaphors speak directly to the emotional side of our brain. They speak in ways that our brain can immediately interpret. If we think about things logically, there's a step-by-step process we have to go to. When someone says a metaphor, you intuitively understand it. You understand it at like an actionable level. And I think, again, using these metaphors to prompt visualization, to prompt a lot of practice or understanding is very, very important. When does Michael use visualization? A lot of the time it's before he naps, which is also a big part of his day. Eat, swim, do other workouts like weightlifting, sleep, that was a routine. Believe me, working out that hard in the morning and then again in the afternoon made my nap no luxury. It was essential. One of the things about my naps is this. If I'm sitting there right before I doze off or immediately after I get up, I can visualize how I want the perfect race to go. I can see the start, the strokes, the walls, the turns, the finish, the strategy, all of it. It's so vivid that I can vividly see incredible detail, down to even the wake behind me. It's my imagination at work, and I have a big imagination. Visualizing like this is like programming a race in my head, and that programming sometimes seems to make it happen just as I had imagined it. I can also visualize the worst race, the worst circumstances. That's what I do to prepare myself for what might happen. It's a good thing to visualize the bad stuff. It prepares you. Maybe you dive in and your goggles fill with water. What do you do? How do you respond? What's important right now? You have to have a plan. I'm not sure precisely why I'm able to visualize like this. I've always been able to, even since I was little. It's also true that I got lots of practice growing up. Since I've been swimming, it's been very much a part of my rhythm and my routine of my life and of the house in which I grew up. So obviously we talked about negative visualization. I find that there are specific times where I can visualize better. So in the morning when I wake up, it's a very powerful time. I think there might be something related to the brainwave states that you get into early in the morning or right before you're about to go to bed. If you struggle with visualization, maybe timing is a factor. Maybe during the middle of the day, you're thinking too much. It's hard to get into a place where you can access this. But to me, that's something that is worth experimenting with at least. I'll also say I'd love to talk to Michael, to Bob Bowman, to someone about the details of the visualization. There's many different ways to visualize. You can visualize from the first person. You can visualize from the third person. You can visualize top-down bird's eye view. I don't know necessarily what is most effective. For example, for me, I cannot visualize from the first person. For some reason, I cannot see myself, for example, hitting a golf ball if I'm in my own body. I can see it from top down. I can see from behind it. Maybe that's because of how I view and watch a lot of golf video. But I think that that's really interesting is how do you visualize? What angle are you taking? I don't think there's a right or wrong, but it is important to understand that and look at the perspective that you do. Something else I thought was interesting is Michael would not visualize before he had a race. Here's him talking about that.
I try not to do it getting into bed because you can get amped up, right? Like you can really get yourself going and it's not really good to kind of have those feelings right before bed. For me, like that's one time where I'm shutting everything down. That's my moment to recharge everything for the night. So like I would do that maybe when I wake up from a nap or when I wake up in the morning.
So sometimes if he had a race the next day, he would not visualize because it would get him too amped up. He would be too in the moment. I think that that's also an important thing is sleep is very important. it's also important to compartmentalize these things and do them when they're functional to you. A lot of the time, most nights, it's probably fine. Most days he wakes up from a nap, but you don't want to compromise your sleep because of these visualizations either. Well, speaking of sleep, I don't know if this is necessarily directly related to visualization, but Michael has quite a few dreams. I think visualizing and dreams, probably some of the same mechanisms are at play. I'll have to talk to an expert about that to see if I'm onto something there. But Michael has these crazy vivid dreams, and they create a lot of meaning for him. Maybe that's why I couldn't shut my eyes that afternoon. My dream was in front of me, hours away. There are times in my sleep when I literally dream my race from start to finish. Other nights, when I'm about to fall asleep, I visualize the point that I know exactly what I want to do. Dive, glide, slope, stroke, flip, reach the wall, hit the split time to the 100th. Then swim back again for as many times as I need to finish the race. It's pretty vivid that first time I do it, but eventually it puts me to sleep, as if I'm counting sheep. And Michael spends a lot of his time asleep, so he sleeps 8 to 10 hours a day plus a 2-hour nap. While also visualizing, he's also dreaming about these races. And these dreams have specific meaning to him as well. This is a really interesting story about kind of manifesting things from his dreams. I think this borders on a little bit of like hokey science, but I still think it's important to note. And I'll get into some analysis after I read the story. Leading up and through the 2008 U.S. Olympic trials for swimming, which were held in Omaha, Nebraska in late June and early July, I kept having the most peculiar dream. It involved the number 307. The 2008 Summer Games in Beijing would get underway August 8. I had no idea what 307 meant or why I kept dreaming about it. But there it was, 307. It was especially perplexing because swimming, like baseball or football, it's a sport with its own history and lore that lends itself especially well to numbers and statistics. Everyone who follows baseball knows Babe Ruth hit 714 home runs during his career, for instance, or that Ted Williams hit 406 in 1941, or that Bob Gibson pitched so magnificently in 1968 that he ended the year with an ERA of 112. 307 didn't necessarily lend itself neatly into any swimming time category. 307, Bob said, had to be a split time, meaning an intermediate time in a given race. In this instance, after the breaststroke leg, or 3/4 of the 400 IM, with only the up and back freestyle portion to go. If you do that, he said, you're going to finish 4:03 something. That would be at least 7, nearing 8 seconds better than I had gone in first setting the record just 6 years before. More than 2 seconds better than I had gone in Melbourne. 4:03? Obviously, some strong part of me believed I could go 4:03. After touching, I whipped around so fast, trying to see my time on the big scoreboard at the other end of the cube, that I bumped my head into the wall. The scoreboard said I hammered home at 4:03.84, just as I had dreamed it. My 300 split time, 3:07.05. Later, looking at the numbers closely, Bob said this might have been my best race. Not likely my best race of the year. He meant the best race I had ever done. Considering the circumstances, taking into account the pressure and distractions and the buildup and the general noise around me and the games, it was exceptional, he said. This is Bob talking about that 307 itself.
And honestly, just to get him out of my office, I said, well, that's probably your 300 split in the 400 IM. If you're going to go 403, you're going to finish in 56, be 307, where was? And he was like, the hair stands up on the back of my neck right now when I tell you, you look up there, it was 307 flat, the 300 in Beijing.
Now, I have talked with some sleep experts, and dreams are one way that we process the things that are happening in the real world. So the REM sleep cycle where we dream is a place where our body can process emotion, process things and concepts. And if we miss out on that part, we miss out on maybe some emotional regulation and some aspect of condensing and making sense of our thoughts. I think that there's a high likelihood that this was already part of Michael's psyche, and he was able to turn this into something that was actionable for him. I think the most important lesson here is that we can take things that we dream or that we see, and we can have them serve us. If we see something in the world we believe is an omen that will make us perform well, it doesn't really matter if it's an omen. If we're convincing ourselves that this is what we're going to do or why we're going to do it, it can have power. The bad part of that is, for example, if we wear our lucky underwear every time we play baseball and we lose our lucky underwear, we're kind of screwed. So we don't want to have that attachment that direction. We only want to have positive attachment to a lot of these things that we're seeing. There's good aspects to and good science around this with the placebo effect. We've talked at length about placebo effect in some other episodes. This blends really well with symbols and rituals. So obviously dreams, there's these symbols associated with it, but there's other symbols and rituals that Michael relies pretty heavily on. He loves this idea of gaining inspiration from movies, from other people, and a lot of these things. He loves the movie Miracle. He says, I was in my room at the Olympic Village watching Miracle, the story about the 1980 US hockey team. I'd watched the movie twice before, and there was one scene that really hit home. Just as we set out to walk out on the deck from the ready room, I said, wait, come back. The four of us huddled together. I don't know if you remember the scene in Miracle before the Soviet game where Brooks tells the team, this is your time. Well, this is our time. I don't care what happened in the past. This is us. This is now. Michael constantly watches this movie. He says he's watched it 2 times. I think that's a lie. According to the book, it seems like he's watched it 20, 30, 40 times. But he loves the messaging. He loves it. He can steal that story and be a part of it in his own way. And I think that this is something that we can all do. Another aspect of this is that he says, and that I could win 8 in Beijing in 2008. 8 is an auspicious number in Chinese culture. The games were going to start on 8/8/08 at precisely 8 p.m. local time. The date and the time were picked because the Chinese word for 8, ba, sounds like the word for prosperity, fa. And 8 gold medals, it seems like it was meant to be. He is weaving this narrative for it to be possible for him to win these 8 gold medals. And I think we can always do that. I talked a lot in the Kobe series about Joseph Campbell, about how athletes are telling stories to themselves constantly. And these stories help them to achieve these incredible things. I did lump all those things under visualization. I think that they do all have some aspects. I mean, visualizing and dreams seem very close. Visualizing and having symbols associated with them is also a way to maybe supercharge those visualizations as well. I would ask you, are you visualizing at all? Do you just visualize the good things, or are you also visualizing how things could go wrong and how you could reconcile them? What details are you visualizing? What details do you care about? I think I really would love to visualize, to interview someone who's more of an expert on visualization. If you know anyone who you think could talk about that topic intelligently, please tell me. This is a topic that I've been very interested in, but I just haven't found the best resource to talk to associated with that. Michael uses visualization regularly. This is a part of his preparation for a lot of these races. There's other aspects that he focuses on too. We're going to talk about some of the ways that he prepares for a race, acts at the race, some of the things that he does, and how he winds down from a race in this next section called Game Time Tools. Win. When you're challenged, what's important now? When it gets to be race day, what's important now? And when things don't go right on race day, and you absolutely have to take action, what's important this very instance? Sometimes there simply is no time to think. The situation demands action. What's it going to be? So WIN is an acronym that Bob uses. We talked about it a little bit before, but I think it really embodies how Michael thinks about each stage of competition. So what happens before the race? What's important now? What happens during the race? What's important now? What happens after the race? What's important now? And this is a really beautiful and elegant framework for us to get the most out of preparation for any events. So before the race, I think it's as important to think about what he isn't worrying about as it is to think about what he cares about. So what is he not worrying about? Michael says, I don't worry about other guys when I'm training, not even Lockheed. I get myself ready. Of course, I'm racing at the Olympics or anywhere against other guys, but I'm also racing against the clock, and maybe mostly against myself to see how good I can be. There's no point in talking smack. Absolutely no need to talk beforehand about what you're going to do. It's not worth it, not worth playing the mind games. Just get in the water and swim. People who talk about what they're going to do, 9 times out of 10, don't back it up. It's always better and a whole lot smarter not to say anything, to simply let swimming do the talking. So he's not worried about his competition, and he's not worried about talking trash. I disagree a little bit with the talking trash. I think that talking smack can be a very effective psychological tactic. You look at combat sports, it's one of the best ways, one, to sell a fight, to get more pay-per-views, to increase your purse, but also to potentially psych your opponent out. I think it can absolutely backfire. And talking smack requires quite a lot of research and studying your opponents and figuring out what makes them tick. But that's a whole nother area of time investment. And if that's not the game you play, it's probably not worth doing, because I'm a believer that if you're going to talk trash, you should do it well. Otherwise, you should completely avoid it. Something he does do, or the things that he does do, is one, take care of his body. So this is Michael talking about his body care when he's not racing.
I treated my body like I was a Ferrari. Like I treated my body like I'm a high performance race car, because I'm asking it to do so many things. So, I was sleeping probably 8 to 10 hours a night with a 2-hour nap during the day. I was eating 8 to 10,000 calories a day, ice tub, massages. I had one PT strength conditioning guy for 15 years that did all of my massages, all of my stretching, all of my Graston, all of my cupping.
Again, Michael here is actually using another metaphor where he's describing his body as a Ferrari. It's an elite sports car. He has to fuel it the right way. He has to take care of it. He has to tune it up. He has to do a lot of these things. And I think that this is a way that a lot of us can view our body and our physical presence when we're training. If we want to perform at the highest level physically all the time, we have to take the best care of this body we have. And unfortunately, we only have one body, so we should probably treat it really well. Something that runs a little bit contra to this is how much Michael would eat, and he'd eat all this junk food. They're saying he was eating 10,000 calories a day just to keep up with his caloric deficit. I found this little clip from Andrew Huberman talking about why swimming burns so many calories. Pretty interesting.
The reason he needed to eat so much is not that he was burning that many calories in pure movement. It's that when you do exercise in water, even if it's warm water, the heat transfer in water is greater. So you burn far more calories. And again, here I'm admittedly lifting that from knowledge that was passed on to me by Tim Ferriss that I didn't. But I checked it out and it's absolutely true. So if you exercise in water, even if it's not really cold water, your caloric needs go way up, which is why you get out of the pool and you're often really hungry.
Michael is still treating his body like a Ferrari, like this elite sports car, because in order to get enough fuel, he's burning so many calories in the pool. He actually has to eat these kind of bad, calorically dense foods in order to get enough calories to keep up and keep going. Michael also sleeps a tremendous amount. As I mentioned before, he's getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep per day plus a 2-hour nap. This to me is a tremendous amount of sleep. This is all long, big picture before races or in between races. What does he do weeks before the race? So the first thing he does is he talks strategy. But on the walk to the bus, I decided to break up the drill. You might think that on race day, Michael and I would spend these pre-race minutes talking last minute strategy. No chance. All the strategy talk had been conducted weeks and months before back in Baltimore when we were working through our game plan and hitting our intermediary goals. I'm a firm believer in getting all the strategy work done ahead of time. That way, when you show up to perform, you're not thinking about your plan, you're simply executing it. I absolutely love that. That one hit pretty home for me. They're getting all the strategy out of the way the week before. They're simply executing when they show up at the races. Let's move a little closer to the event. So what is he doing the night before? Throughout the whole year, I have my goals in mind. I'm always thinking about them, no matter what I'm doing. But the night before race, I stay relaxed. I'll lie in my bed, I'll watch TV, and I'll talk to whoever my roommate is. We'll laugh and look up some videos online. Where other swimmers are dead silent leading up to the race, I'm staying relaxed. As I get closer to the big meet, I relax and get laid back because the hard work is done and the fun part, the thrill of competition, is in front of me. He says, I felt no pressure. My plan was to get some sleep and be ready to go in the morning amid dreams of 3:07. So Michael is trying to relax as best he can before the race. All the hard work is done. Nothing he does the night before is really going to impact how he's going to perform the next day. And so he can relax and just try to be as effective as possible. This is when he would watch Miracle a lot. He also would not visualize the night before because that would keep him up. I had already alluded to that. So we talked about before the race, all the things that happen. What does he do at the race to get the most out of himself? For years, I've had the same routine to get ready for a race. I got to the cube per the routine 2 hours before the races, like I always do. I stretched and loosened up a bit first. Then I got into the water, wearing just a brief, it's not time for competition style suits, much less full body gear. And I swam my warm up, 800 mixer to start, alternating 50 freestyle with 50 of something else, anything but free, 600 meters of kicking with the kickboard, 400 meters of pulling a buoy, however I want to do it, something to warm up my arms, a 200 medley drill, then some 25s just to get the heart going a little bit. Since I was getting ready for the 400 medley, I also did 1 or 2 25s of each stroke. When I was done with that, I swam down for 75 to 100 meters. To me, that would be a full workout. For Michael Phelps, this is a warm-up that he does every time to get his body ready. The warm-up went uneventfully. I dried off, got warm, put my headphones on, and sat on the massage table. I always sit, I don't lie down. From that point on, no matter the event, Bob and I don't talk until the end of the race. I mean, what's there to say? When I'm in the ready room, I'm there by myself and to be by myself. Usually the officials who are in the room try to sit all the guys in the same row if you're in the same race or the same heat. I never do that. I just find a seat where I can sit by myself and block the 2 seats on either side. My cap and goggles go on one, the towel on the other. Finally, I walked onto the deck with M&Ms till I collapsed, blaring in my headphones. I'm a huge hip hop fan, and for the last year, I've listened to that song before each race. I won't repeat all the words, but it begins like this. Sometimes you feel tired, feel weak. When you feel weak, you feel like you want to give up. But you got to search within you, find that inner strength. I toweled off the block in my lane 4, took the headphones off, and stretched my legs against the block. Right leg first, left leg second. On the blocks, I have a ritual of bending down, reaching my arms above my head, and swinging them back 3 times across my chest fast. Then I get into a track start, one leg behind the other, wait for a loud beep, and go. It's my routine to stand on the left side of the block and get into it from that side. I made sure the block itself was dry. This is a lesson learned the hard way. At the 2004 Santa Clara meet, before the 400 IM, I didn't notice the block was wet. Instead of diving in, I more or less fell off the block. Embarrassing. Since then, I've always made sure to wipe the block with a towel. Once up there, like I always do, I swung my arms, flapped them in front and then in back, slapping my back. Some people have suggested that's a routine I do to psych people out. They think I'm thinking, even if you can't see me behind your goggles, here's the sounds announcing that you'll get your butt kicked. Nothing of the sort. That would be poor sportsmanship to the extreme. It's just routine, my routine. It's a routine I've done through my whole life. I'm not going to change it. This is all about control. The more control you exert over your environment, the more control you have over your mind. Another athlete who does this, Rafa Nadal, you see him line up his water bottles, all this stuff on the bench. He can exert control in that space and gives him more control over his mind, over his process. All of this, as you can tell, is very meticulous. He does the same thing every race. That helps him to get into the same mental state, the same physical state, the same every state for the race as he does in practice. I think maybe this routine's a little long, but at the same time, if he can execute it at the same time, every single time, in all these different locations, he can have success doing that. These are all the physical things that he's doing. He's talking through his process. But what's going on in Michael Phelps' mind before the race? This is him talking about his mindset before a race. He says, I get asked all the time what I think about when I'm up on the blocks. In the instant before the starter says, take your marks, nothing. There's nothing that I can change, nothing I can do to get faster. I've done all the training. All I can do is listen for the beep, dive in the water, and swim. He says, once I got up on the blocks, I had to get over all of that. So this is a time when Michael wasn't feeling particularly well before a race. How I felt then was not the least bit important to what is possible now. It was time to go out and race. The weight training obviously making a huge difference in what I was able to do. So Michael is doing everything that he can so that when he gets on the blocks, he has nothing to think about aside from swimming, aside from jumping in the pool. And maybe I should put this a little higher up, but he is only thinking about what is ahead of him. For Michael, he has a lot of races to swim. He only thinks about the first race in front of him. He says, I knew I had to have a good first race. And that was a very good thing. I can't emphasize it enough. A good first race sets the tone. So every race is important. The first one, he has to be present and there and ready for. Outside of individual races, a lot of these meets are multiple days. And he creates these individual routines for a lot of the places he goes. Here's a list of some of the mini routines. This is something we've seen from a lot of athletes. I don't really necessarily know what it gives meaning to, but maybe it's an additional aspect of control. The more these athletes can control, generally the better, because if they're outside the pool is canned and they're is very like tightly orchestrated and they know exactly what the expectations are, that might transcend into the pool or onto the court. Every night I'd order a chicken sandwich and cheesecake, and I became attached to that meal as I did with clam chowder and Federal Way. I'm glad to report that nobody started calling me Mr. Chicken Sandwich. So people started calling him Mr. Clam Chowder because he'd eat clam chowder every day at this Federal Way meet. Very similar to Tiger Woods. So during the 1997 Masters, Tiger had Arby's every single night. He just kept going, which I think is kind of funny. But you find comfort meal, you find routine, you have these superstition or rituals. They inevitably work because of the placebo effect. At each competition, it seems there's certain habits that I like to fall into for the duration of the meet. When we first arrived in Texas, I started playing the song Perfect Gentleman by Wycliffe Jean on my CD player. I thought, oh, I can get into this. So I played it on my headphones while I was waiting in the ready room before all the races. So we talked about everything before the races, sort of during the aggregate of the meet. But what does Michael think about during the race? I think that this is something that is a little different than a lot of people would think. This is Michael talking about that. He says, I have a habit of looking at the clock during the backstroke because I can face the scoreboard. I knew I was on target and I could feel that I was starting to pull away from swimmers next to me by 2 body lengths I'd wanted. When I came off the last wall with 50 meters to go, I looked to my left and saw Italy's Alessio Bugliato approaching the wall in lane 3. Then I looked to my right and I saw Hungary's Lazo Che, probably butchered both those names, just getting to the wall in lane 5. Since the people who swim the fastest in the heats get the middle lanes in those finals, those swimmers can usually keep a close eye on their competition. Something that Michael does here is he watches the leaderboard. He wants to know where he stands. Tiger did this. A lot of the great athletes want to know where they stand. This goes a little bit against the idea of putting your blinders on, but when you're swimming a lot of races, when you have a lot of time left, you kind of want to know where you stand. Sometimes you have to conserve energy. Sometimes you have to let it all go to make a statement, a psychological statement. A lot of these athletes can adapt and iterate based on where they stand. And I think that that's a good thing. You should want to know where you stand. You shouldn't be obsessed with it, but making an observation and getting back to executing is a skill you can develop. The last game time tool that I think is important is, what does Michael do after a race? I put my arm up in the air, but I was in a trance. Even though I'd been ahead in the race, it still didn't sink in that I had won until I looked up and saw the number 1 next to my name. I was waiting for the switch to go off so I could let my emotions go. The switch came from lane 1. Mike, it was Eric swimming over across the lane lines to get me. I hadn't even noticed that he had finished second. We went 1-2. Yeah, Vent. Yeah, I shouted. We did it. So something that Michael has to do is he has to take time to come down. Sometimes he doesn't, though, if he has more races. So figuring out when he can kind of go back to himself and not be game time Michael Phelps is an important thing. If you're game time Michael Phelps and you're completely intense all the time, you're probably pretty miserable to be around out of the pool. So he has to turn this off. Again, sometimes he can't do that because he has so many things to do. He says, what's important now was taking the briefest of moments to appreciate what I had done. 9 swims down, 8 to go. So he has 17 races at the 08 Olympics. So he can appreciate it, but then he has to get back to work. There's another great quote where Kobe's being interviewed. I believe it was after 4 games, where they won in the NBA championship, and he just looks pissed. And they're like, why are you so upset? And he just goes, job's not finished. I'll play that here. I freaking love that quote.
You're only half happy, or?
Still to be happy about.
You're up 2-0.
Job's not finished. Job finished? I don't think so.
And kind of end the section with Michael talking about what his body needs, how he recovers himself.
I know I need 8 hours of sleep. How can I guarantee I'm going to get it? I used to always watch a movie.
Yeah.
I was that guy. Miracle. I watched that one before 08. Hoosiers, another good one.
So when thinking about your game time rituals, routines, I think it's important to figure out who you become on the court or in the pool or any of these things. In the Kobe series, I talked a ton about the Mamba mentality. I talked a ton about the alter ego effect and how rituals are a huge part of becoming the competitor that can dominate the moment, or becoming the version of yourself that is the most effective for your field of play. I'd ask you, how do you ramp up? How do you get ready for these competitions? Is it a psychological thing you do? Is it a physical thing you do? Are there specific routines that you have? And then afterwards, how do you decompress? A lot of the times we get so amped up that we can't sleep, and then we have to wake up the next day and do stuff, and it's just completely unfunctional. How do you also let go of the things that you can't control and stay in the moment as much as possible? Obviously, Michael does this by controlling his environment, his routines, and these types of things. But I'm interested in how you do that. And maybe just thinking about that can help get consistency in your performance as you continue to go. A lot of these things, a lot of the idea of staying in the moment and getting around the hardship you face in executing has to deal with how well you deal with adversity. And this is a big part of Michael's training, a big part of his process. This next section is going to focus specifically on that. This is Michael talking about how he overcame flooded goggles. I think this is a great teaser for how he deals with adversity.
I had no visibility.
Crazy.
I mean, after 25 meters, I was completely blind. So the reason why that was so easy for me to do was we would do that in practice. So if I'm going 26 seconds, I have to take 16 strokes. 28 seconds, 18 strokes. So I'm swimming to try to learn how to be as efficient as I can every single stroke I take in practice. So for me, at the biggest moment, it comes out and it's natural, right? I'm on autopilot. So my goggles do fill up with water. I take my kicks.
He said, I was half a second ahead of Ryan going into the last leg, the freestyle, when my goggles started sliding off my eyes. I couldn't see Ryan or Lazo all during the freestyle because my eyes were full of water. Some people thought I was angry because of the way I ripped my goggles off in the finish, but I really just wanted to see the time. It was 1:54.98, 0.86 seconds better than my time at Panpax. New records, new goggles. So Michael is preparing for anything that goes bad through his visualization. He's preparing for these scenarios. But what happens when you can't plan for these scenarios? I think that practicing through adversity is one of the best ways to prepare for anything that happens. In episode 2 and 3, I go at length about how Bob Bowman has prepared Michael for literally anything. There's also bad things that happen physically. So Michael has injuries. He injured his back. He's injured his hand. He's injured his wrist. He's had a lot of these different ailments, and he's able to get through them in different ways. So the first one is his back injury. So Michael's sister, I believe it was Whitney, was also an unbelievably high-level swimmer. She was slated to try to qualify for the Olympics, but her back injuries essentially kept her out of swimming. He said, I was given 3 options. Stop training for 6 months, practice through the pain with uncertain short and long-term consequences to my discs, surgery with at least 3 months of no swimming. What was unsaid, of course, was that my entire career might be at risk. Even if it was being thought by me and by anyone who knew Whitney in the family history, more options were sought. In the meantime, as I rested, my symptoms just like that went away. We began to incorporate cross-training and core work into my training, meaning push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, sessions with a medicine ball. So sometimes adversity can be solved with taking some time off and just letting your body recover, letting your mind recover. That is completely a viable way. Sometimes you really have to push through a lot of things. So, for example, when Michael broke his wrist just a little bit before the 2008 Olympics, he essentially went in immediately for surgery because that would give him the best opportunity to compete in the game still. He went through, he was on the bike, he was really pushing through this. Michael's also dealt with DUIs. He's had a lot of mental health challenges, but the biggest things for him for dealing with adversity was, 1, practicing a lot of this adversity in the pool, but also an incredible support network. So his families, particularly his coach, Bob Bowman, and also facing a lot of these things head on. So Michael had, I believe, 2 DUIs. He had this picture of him smoking a bong, and which now in 2024 would not even be news. But he went in and faced it head on, took accountability for his actions, and was able to progress through them. I think part of overcoming difficult things is doing the hard work to change. And Michael was very clearly able to face that head on and go ahead and do that. I talked about this at length in other episodes, but the idea of a hero's journey, I think, is very important. So all of these athletes, if they believe that they're on this lifelong quest, if they believe that achieving greatness comes with sacrifice and difficulty, part of the ups is facing the downs and overcoming them. In every single narrative, if we look at Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, all heroes reach something great in the end, but it isn't without conflict. If these athletes can frame the challenges they face as conflicts that they must overcome to achieve what their life vision is, their purpose is, then these challenges become conquerable obstacles rather than just these crazy setbacks. Something that Michael has been unbelievably good at is learning from his mistakes. And I want to go into a couple examples where he does that. This is Michael himself talking about learning from those mistakes.
We both just hung our credential on the door. So as I'm leaving for the pool, I grab his credential instead of mine. So I can't get into the credential, or I can't get into the pool with his credential. So we had to somehow figure out a way to get back to the village, have somebody bring my credential to me outside, and then go back over to the pool. And by that point, I was already late getting into the water. I was kind of off my routine. So maybe that's why I didn't get the results that I wanted, but I'm happy I got the results that I did, because that helped me catapult my way into the next 4 years, which got crazy.
So Michael is incredible in the pool. He's really good at working and learning in that domain. But outside of the pool, he had a lot of places to learn. So one really clear area where he needed to improve was his organization outside of the pool. He made a mistake at his first Olympics where he grabbed the wrong badge and he was late. And that very well could have been the reason why he didn't medal in that first Olympics. Early in Michael's career, when he's at some of the trials, this is an example of an area where he made a mistake and he's able to improve and learn from that lesson. He said, I swam a 2:07 in the 200 fly and was dead last in my heat. The time was more than 2 seconds slower than I had swum at juniors. It was a good lesson for Bob that perhaps I wasn't just ready yet. Logically, I should have been able to swim as fast there as I did in Orlando, but this was a different atmosphere altogether. I remember being on the deck, getting ready for my heat and thinking, wow, there's Tom Dolan. Later, I was sitting in the stands watching Tim Malchaw walk across the pool deck. I wasn't really trying to see what his practice habits were, but I was just watching him because I was in awe of him. And more important, in awe of the fact that I was swimming at the same meet as the defending Olympic silver medalist. I got to see the elite swimmers up close, but I was focusing on what they were doing rather than what I was doing. So Michael, in retrospect, is thinking about how he's kind of has imposter syndrome. He's observing and in awe of these people rather than being a student of these people, rather than being someone who really believes that he can defeat these people and he should be in the same pool with them. As he mentions this outside of that he didn't really go through his normal routine. He said some stuff that he wouldn't normally say. And in retrospect, he's not going to make that mistake again. I believe it was in that race or in another race that he forgot his cap and goggles. He forgets kind of these basic things. Maybe that's one of the reasons why his routine is so rigid, is he doesn't make those types of mistakes. But that routine is an evolution from the mistakes he's made. He talked about how in one meet, he didn't clean off the diving board and he slipped and fell. That's why part of his routine is to now wipe off the block every time he stands up there. This is Michael, again, talking about how he's addicted to the process and the things that he's learned from each Olympics.
You know, the learning experiences that I had from 2000 Olympics helped me in 2004. What happened in 2004 helped me in 2008. What happened in 2008, I chose to not let help me in 2012. And in 2016, I was able to kind of compile them all together to help me actually be happy and to love what I was doing. So it is a process to go through when you want to be successful at something.
I also like this excerpt from Michael here, where he talks about the races that stick out the most to him.
The races that stick out the most are the ones that didn't go as planned, because those are the ones I learned the most from. When I did get second place, I could have done something better in my preparation than what I did, and I deserved to get second.
Something I think it's important to call out is essentially the losses are a roadmap for where you can improve. So if you're thinking about, oh, how can I get better? How can I expand on this? You have essentially all the information that you need by looking at where you haven't or you've come up short. Everything you've done to come up short is generally an area where you can improve. He says, a couple months before the 2007 Worlds, I went to Bob and asked him for a video of all my swims from Athens. He didn't push this on me. This was me asking. I took those videos and watched them over and over. When I had watched the 200 free from the 2004 Olympics, I understood clearly that I had gone out too slowly and that the third turn had left me an impossible disadvantage. Michael is here very clearly studying his craft and thinking about how to get better. A lot of the time, it's hard to watch the losses, and I think Michael waited for a while to do this, but sometimes you have to face them directly and scrutinize them to be able to figure out exactly how to improve. Now, this is Michael talking about the defeat he learned the most from.
There have been a couple. 2002, when I got beat in the 200 fly at PAMPAX in Fukuoka in Japan. I got beat in the 200 fly because I felt that I wanted to do the training my way and not listen to what my coach was saying. So that was a good learning experience for me earlier in my career, just to trust my coach more.
This is something we'll talk about a little bit later in, I believe it's part 3, which is how much is your responsibility versus how much is it on your coach to help you take accountability of what you're doing. Very clearly, Michael realized that doing it his way wasn't the best way. And Bob Bowman gave him a little bit of freedom to learn that lesson on his own. Is that part of great coaching? How much trade-off is there between you and your coach in that way? I also think it's interesting to hear how Michael defines failure when we're talking about learning from mistakes.
How in somebody's right mind can they say that's a failure? Because there aren't many people on this planet that can say they're an Olympic gold medalist. And for me to be able to do that, it was a lifetime dream to just have that opportunity once. I had the chance to have it 6 times there, 8 times there. I just fell short in the other 2. But that gave me the motivation clearly for the next 4 years.
We talked a little bit about this when we're talking about our goals and what happens when you don't necessarily achieve your goals. I think a lot of the same messaging is here is you can find success, you can find a win in everything, even if it is a loss. A win is, it's still a win to learn and to pursue your goals, even if you come up a little bit short. I want to end this section with Michael talking again about how he uses his losses. I think this is a very, very powerful force. It's also a good segue into the next section, which is ways that Michael is able to motivate himself. This is a Jordan-esque level of self-motivation that he has, and we're going to take a very deep dive into that.
I'm happy that I didn't have many losses, but I would have liked more because they really motivated me. Like the loss in 2012 in the 200 fly killed me for like 2 years.
It's pretty interesting. Michael actually wishes he had more losses, so he had more fuel, more motivation, more lessons from those losses. And it's also very interesting. We don't necessarily have to lose in real competition. A lot of the greatest athletes that I studied, they lost by design. So a Kobe, he would play in a bunch of different leagues. And in some of those leagues, it didn't really matter if he won. He was able to practice these silly moves or try new things in the leagues where it didn't really matter if he won, and he could take the lessons from failure in those leagues to when it really mattered. I think that there's a great tiered system about this. As I mentioned before, Michael is one of the greatest, probably of all time, at motivating himself. I want to take a really deep study into some of the tools that he used there. And I think this will be pretty eye-opening for everyone listening. I know this was very, very effective for helping me to motivate myself more. Now, this is by far probably the longest part of the episode, but I think it is totally worth it. There's some techniques in here. There's some psychology that he uses that I thought was very, very effective. With Bob's prompting, I discovered something else about myself early on. I could be motivated not just by winning. I could be motivated by improving my strokes, hitting split times, setting records, doing my best times. There are any number of things that I could do to get better. Winning never gets old, but there was a way to win that showed I was getting better and could do better still. Bob used to say to me, "Let's just see what you've got in you. Use all the gas in the tank." I started using his saying. I would say to him before a meet, "Let's just see what I have in me." I wouldn't say I want to win. It would be, I want to see what I have in me. Something I want to pull out of there that I think really highlights on this section is he learned that he could be motivated not just by winning, and that there were any number of things that he could do to get better. Something that I've seen with all these athletes that I've studied is they have not just one tank, they have like 10 different energy fuel reserves to motivate them from. So if one thing isn't motivating them one day, they can go and pull on another lever and open up another tank. And I was really taken aback, or not taken aback. I was really in awe of these athletes and the psychological tactics they can use to get excited and motivated about anything. If I had to create a parallel between a lot of different great kind of one-of-one athletes, I'd say that this is probably it, is that these athletes are better able to motivate or get themselves to do things than any other people. So the first thing that motivates Michael is his place in history. We talked about his dreams. We talked about how important it is for him to feel like he's a pioneer in the field. This is Michael talking about how doing something different is motivational for him.
Doing something different though, because like for me at 15, when I came back from the 2000 Olympic Games as a 15-year-old, and after the Olympics is usually when people take time off, where they take a break, they relax for 3 to 6 months, and then they get back into it. For me, I was into it the next day after the final of the 200 fly. I was 5th place. I was 0.3 out of a medal. I was upset. So I used that as motivation leading into the next year. And the very first day that we had a practice, my coach put WR on the top right-hand corner of the paper. WR meant world record. I was a 15-year-old kid. I was like, oh, yeah, I know what this is, but why is this? What's this doing here? Like, why are you putting this in the upper right-hand corner? He's like, we're going to break a world record in 6 months. And I was like, all right.
The next thing that unbelievably motivates Michael is losing. So Michael says 80% of swimmers like to win, 20% hate to lose, and 95% of the Olympic team comes from the hate to lose group. When I'm focused, there is not one single thing, person, anything that can stand in my way of doing something. There is not. I just want something bad enough. I feel I'm going to get there. That's just how I've always been. This is a parallel we've seen quite a bit. Every great athlete I've talked to has said that they basically would hate losing more than they like winning. And that is a very common thing. One of my favorite stories actually is when Tiger and Elin, I think it was before they got married. No, maybe it was around when they got married. Tiger won his first tournament while they were dating. And she before had been working with Jesper Parnevik. And she said, when are we going to throw the party that when the Parneviks won, we would celebrate and we do this thing. And Tiger just says to her, we're supposed to win. It's, the idea that winning really doesn't matter that much. Not losing is what matters to Tiger. And I thought that was a very telling thing about his expectations, his psychology, and the way that he approaches things. I don't know if that's necessarily healthy. I think you should celebrate some of your wins, but maybe not at the scope that they're talking about. So in Pan Pacs in 2002, Michael said, I lost again to Tom in the 200 fly, which is my second indication that summer that I couldn't take butterfly training for granted just because I had a world record. I hated losing, and I hated hearing Bob say, you see what I mean? From that day on, whenever Bob gave me a butterfly set, I did it and gave it my best effort. That's all he wants. Bob really has a feel for when I'm not swimming well because I have a technical problem and when I'm simply not trying my best. He's not the easiest guy to trick. So another example of when Michael has lost, he has put all of his energy into training the 200 fly. And again, I believe he very quickly broke another world record after that. Another example of this is in the World in Montreal in 2005. He says, it was a lesson I would rather not have been reminded of, that racing at a world-class level takes everything you've got, and you have to bring it each and every day. But I got reminded. I'd be reminded of that time and time again in Montreal, particularly later that meet in the 100 fly. Every day thereafter at the pool or the weight room or in Ann Arbor, I felt the sting. My response to that, the work that losing would spur me to put in, that was something I could control. Ian Thorpe's willingness to keep swimming, that I had no control over of. The work I was putting in jumped to a new level. So Ian Thorpe was the one that beat him in the freestyle in 2005. He says he's going to retire from swimming. And so Michael is basically concerned he'll never swim against him again. He can't control that, but he can control the work that he'll put in. He can control how he can use his anger and the sting of the loss to fire it into how he's going to get better. He said, I was in the ready area waiting for my turn in the second heat of the butterfly when Andrei Serdenov of Ukraine swam a blistering 51:76 to break the world record in Heat 1. I was furious. I looked up at Bob, who was standing in a runway that overlooked both the pool on one side and the ready room on the other, and I just smirked at him. I was definitely feeling confident about being able to break it back. I was so fired up that I had to tell myself not to go out too fast. The strategy I discussed with Bob was to go out in control and come down like a madman. I hit the last wall, feeling as though I just hadn't released a lot of anger, but also as though I still had a lot left. I didn't expect to see a world record 51:47 on the scoreboard. About the same time, I slapped my hand against the wall and let my emotions go. A reporter was over there in the mix zone asking Surdinov what it felt like to break his first world record. Before he could answer, the public address announcer shouted my name 51:47 seconds. Surdinov never answered the question. His record had lasted about 5 minutes. So Surdinov broke, obviously, Michael's record, and Michael wanted it back. And this created an incredible amount of energy, incredible amount of focus from him in that same way. Now, it's not just losing that gives Michael energy, that motivates him. It's also just competition in general. Here's Michael talking about how competition is the reward oftentimes for him. Michael says, I have the utmost respect for my competitors. I love to race them. Those guys help me. The faster they get, the faster I get, because I don't want to lose. So maybe this is a little bit tied to losing. But we saw, for example, with Roger Federer, that he loved his competition because they made him better. They made him push himself harder. And I think Michael has a lot of that in him too. He likes facing the best competition because that brings out the best in him. And he is in pursuit of his own personal milestones, his own personal goals and aspirations. And if other people can be used to motivate him, to help him become the best version of himself, I think he's more than happy to leverage them in that way. And this helps in practice as well as in events. So Grant Hackett and I had a blast. We raced each other over 50 meters, both with and without fins, 30 times with a tenth of a second rest. Every time we raced with pulleys of some kind, he just destroyed me. Without them, we were pretty even. Just the adrenaline rush of racing down under with somebody as fast as Grant got me through the workouts. I really think those workouts helped to take me where I am today. So he developed a great friendship with Grant Hackett. One of the podcasts I listened to was him and Grant Hackett on the Tim Ferriss show. A really good podcast. I highly recommend you check that out. And all of the content that I've listened to, if you have like 60 hours of time to do the same research I did. But Michael enjoys swimming with other people because he can push himself and test himself against his friends. He says that April, meanwhile, Eric Vent showed up in Ann Arbor, intent on resuming his racing career. I could not have been more thrilled. I needed, to use Bob's analogy, to make a considerable deposit into the fitness bank, and no one ever trained harder than Eric Vent. So even in training, Michael is finding a way to push himself against these other people. Now, in competition, he gets this as well. He says third place finishes aren't all bad. The next evening, we had the finals of the 200 free. The race, some people said that I shouldn't try to swim. Why take on something like this when an easier option is available? If I could be really good at other sports, I'd want to pitch to Barry Bonds, guard Michael Jordan, sidestep Ray Lewis, or stop Wayne Gretzky when they all were at their best. I might not succeed, but I wouldn't want to spend my career training every day without measuring myself against the best. That's why I wanted to swim the race. So this is where I believe Ian Thorpe and another great freestyler were in the race. Michael's strongest stroke has always been butterfly. It wasn't necessarily breaststroke. And so he could have potentially won if he swam an easier race, but he chose to do this to compete against these other people. This is an incredible motivating force for him. He wants to test himself against the best. That is one of his personal milestones that he evaluates his performance on. The point of competition isn't always to take the easiest way out, but to meet the biggest challenge. I love it when people tell me I can't do something because it fires me up more to prove them wrong. I wanted to race Ian in a freestyle event before either of us retired. And there's this whole aspect of the individual people that are motivating to him as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the competitors. So a big one for him was Ian Thorpe. He says, I have a strong desire to race against him and to try to beat him because of how much I respect him. To compete in any race with Ian in the field is the ultimate, but it always has been competitive, not personal. I thrive on whatever will motivate me, whether it's another swimmer's presence or someone else's words. So I measure myself against him, not to put him down, but to lift my performance up. I think that's a kind of artful thing that he said. I really respect his view of the idea that iron is going to sharpen iron, and he wants to go in with the hardest iron in the most difficult conditions. There were half a dozen swimmers who were capable of beating me, and I was getting a fair amount of advice not to swim it. But the race also represented a chance to swim against Ian Thorpe in one of his best events, and I didn't want to miss out on that chance. I really wanted to put up a good time in Long Beach. And this is Michael essentially debating what race to compete in. U.S. Swimming needed to finalize its roster, the 200 back or the 200 free. The 200 free, I wanted a shot at Ian Thorpe. And that's effectively the decision he made. He could swim in the 200 back, which is probably an easier race against softer competition, or he could take on Ian Thorpe. Yes, I understood fully. I wanted to race in this race against the guys who made up this field. And I especially wanted to race Ian Thorpe, the world record holder, before either of us was done. The point of competition is to compete. It's to take on the biggest challenge. When you compete against the very best, it makes you better. I don't care if someone is 20 times better or 1/10 better. I want to race that best. I hate to lose, but I was not afraid to lose. I'm never afraid to lose. And then that loss in Athens, so he does lose, has to be looked on as maybe the defining moment of my swim career. I stepped up and raced the best. I found out I was good in the 200 free, but not good enough. I had work to do. I was proud to stand on that podium with Peter and Ian. With Ian in particular, it's competitive, never personal, but at the same time, I felt immense resolve. This reminds me of something that Kobe said. So Kobe recognized and appreciated the idea that he was going to look stupid sometimes. He said basically that he's playing against the best guys in the world, and of course they're going to make him look stupid. But he's happy to be playing against the best guys in the world. He's going to do incredible things against them. But inevitably, if you are facing the best, you're going to lose sometimes. You're going to stumble sometimes. That is part of the show. That's part of it. And you should appreciate that part. Another athlete that Michael was friends with, but also competed against, was Ian Crocker. So Ian was another butterflyer who was probably one of Michael Phelps's biggest competition in that stroke. So Ian also signed with Octagon after finishing his career under Eddie Reese at the University of Texas, and he and I become friends. That didn't stop me from ripping out a centerfold picture of him and putting it on my wall above my bed. Every morning when I woke up, I had to see the photo of Ian, and it was like a double espresso and a kick in the butt together. I wanted to be on that next cover and to have that next centerfold. I had to get up that morning and train so I wouldn't lose again. As much as I used my losses to Ian to motivate me over the last year, I felt an odd kinship with a guy behind the poster on my wall. He pushed me. If he hadn't been that good, he couldn't have pushed me that hard. And this is the headline that he's talking about in the centerfold. The headline of the cover in the October 2003 issue of Swimming World in bright yellow letters shouted, "Super Flyer." That would be Croc, guitar in hand, leaned up against a 1971 Buick. Inside was a lengthy feature that included a centerfold of Croc swimming the fly. I ripped out that centerfold and plastered it on my wall above my bed. Every morning, the first thing I'd see when I woke up was the photo. Every morning, the photo was a kick in the backside. It drove me, it pushed me, it punished me. And here's Michael himself talking about how Ian Crocker was a motivation for him.
He gave me one of the biggest beatdowns that I probably ever took in 2005. He literally beat me by a body length in the last 40 meters of the race. And I was second. And that was probably to this date, the biggest beatdown I've ever taken in my life. And that frustrated me to no other. And for me, if I have a loss like that, that's going to stick with me more than any other victory.
This is another parallel to Roger Federer, just loving his competition. That's one of the things I respected most about Roger Federer is he could be friends with these guys, but he knew he wanted to beat these guys. And he also knew that he couldn't have been his best without Rafa, without Djokovic, without some of these other athletes. Another athlete he has learned quite a bit from is Ryan Lochte. And this is him talking about that rivalry.
You know, I can honestly say that I don't know if I've ever had a competitor for this many years that I still go head to head with, that we are literally stroke for stroke in every single race. Mm-hmm. And Ryan's that. I mean, he definitely pushes me because I hate to lose, and I push him because he's probably the same exact way. I mean, neither one of us want to take second.
I know I went a little bit deep into depths into some of these stories, but I feel like you learn a lot from Michael talking about his relationship with these other swimmers and how badly he wants to beat these other guys, but this weird kinship that he feels with them. That to me tells a lot better story than me just analyzing these things. The other people, not his peers, that he gained a lot of motivation and energy from were his critics. And I think he does this in a really interesting way. He says, I use whatever I can to motivate myself. Tell me I can't do something, and it's like a lighted match next to a fuel tanker. I don't throw goggles anymore, but I always keep the internal tanker at the ready position. And something that Michael loved, something that Michael Jordan loved, something that a lot of these athletes love and realize is that if they read the news, they have unlimited fuel. There's always going to be someone saying something that they don't like, and that's always a little spark that they might need to really get them going. So one of the critics that was most vocal about Michael Phelps was Dan Talbot. So Bob came over to the pool and showed me a clip that had run in the Australian papers. The article quoted Dan Talbot, a consultant to the Aussie team and its former head coach. In part, the article read, "We got Ian Thorpe and they're trying to say they've got someone even better. In the major international meets, Phelps has done nothing yet. Obviously, something's going to happen at Worlds, but I think the Worlds will be a bit of a crossroads for him to see what he can do when he gets up against the world best. We know Phelps is a good boy, but people are trying to say he's a greater swimmer than Ian, and that's absolute nonsense. The promise for Phelps is there, but for people saying he's going to outdo Thorpe, I live to see the day." Michael says, "I was furious. Done nothing yet. You mean winning a world championship and breaking a world record is nothing?" And then Don Talbot opened his mouth again. "Thorpe is still number one in my opinion, and Phelps doesn't outdo him yet." Talbot quoted in the Australian newspapers a few days before the meet got underway. There was more. The Americans want to claim they invented Jesus Christ before he came, and the same thing with Phelps. They're saying he was the greatest in the world when Thorpe was the thing. The last lap, Pop would say later, was perhaps the best lap he had ever seen, at least at the time. He knew the race was over at 50 meters. When I'd beaten everyone to that first wall, he turned to Mark Schubert, the U.S. national coach, and said, "This one's done." Mark would later say that it looked like I was racing Ian, even though Ian wasn't in the pool. Bob had been hoping for 1:44 something. I touched, turned, and looked back at the clock. It read 1:43.86. Not just a world record by 0.2 of a second, and better than I'd ever done before in the 200 free by nearly a second and a half. I had erased Thorpe's name from the record books in his own country. So obviously Michael is getting revenge, but he had used and leveraged all that motivation from Dan Talbot to essentially shove those words down his throat. And if you're talking about critics, I think even Ian Thorpe was a critic of his. So not just as a competitor, but as like a commentator, as someone saying things publicly, Michael was always battling against Ian Thorpe. And they're really good friends, don't get me wrong. Ian Thorpe is one of Michael Phelps' idols. But some of the things that Ian Thorpe said were prickles to Michael or were major motivators for him. So a lot of people didn't believe that Michael could break Mark Spitz's record of 7 gold medals in an Olympic. And Ian Thorpe was one of those people. He says, "I don't think he'll do it, but I'd love to see it," Ian said. "There's a thing called competition. It won't just be one athlete that will be competing. And in a lot of events, he has a lot of strong competition." Bob, always sleuthing, knew I'd be keen to read Ian's opinion. At the Michigan pool, I had a collection of suits, caps, goggles, towels, and water bottles in my locker. All of it stashed around a big hook hanging from the locker top. After reading a sheet of paper with Ian's remarks, I took the paper and jammed it right onto the hook. It stayed there all that winter, all that spring into the summer, until we went to Omaha and to the trials. Every day when I'd open that locker, it was the first thing I'd see. That article, Ian's words, dangling there. Every day when I'd close that locker door, that fluttering piece of paper served as a reminder of the many doubters. Here was another doubter. I love doubters. I love all doubters. I welcome all comments. This reminds me of David Goggins, who just will, if you're not familiar with him, he's self-proclaimed the hardest man on the planet. If I remember correctly, he would record all of the mean things that people are saying to him about on social media and just listen it back while he runs and exercises. It's maybe psychopathic behavior, but it definitely can kick you and get you going. And it seems like Michael had a primitive early version of that. The funny thing is, if you really look at what Ian Thorpe says, it isn't necessarily detracting from Michael. He says, I don't think anyone will get 8, but if there's any person on the planet that can, it's Michael Phelps. So he wasn't necessarily that critical. He just thought that the overall achievement was very difficult. It wasn't anything against Michael Phelps. But Michael is able to twist this and convince himself that this person is talking bad about him. Again, at the end of the day, they're all friends. But the jujitsu, the psychological jujitsu Michael is doing to make this sound like the worst thing in the world, that Ian Thorpe is a true doubter, is also a skill. Again, maybe not a long-term make you happy type of skill, but definitely an effective short-term motivating you to achieve your goals type of skill. Something I also liked is Thorpe kind of knew this. So this is after Thorpe was retired from swimming, and he knew that he could actually help Michael to motivate himself. And this is Michael talking about that.
Or Ian Thorpe saying that it was impossible for somebody to ever win 8 gold medals at an Olympics. Or he said in 2016, nobody over the age of 30 would win an individual gold medal. So like all of those little things for me, if somebody ever has a doubt, I love it. All it's going to do is fuel me 100 times over.
Funny enough, I was giving him shit about it after the Olympics in 16. And he goes, I know how you work. He said, so I was helping you give that, get that extra fuel to really give you some extra motivation to really make sure you kick some ass. So
something that Michael also does very well, and I want to reiterate, is highlighting quotes, using them, putting them everywhere, putting things on hooks, creating all these reminders for himself. This is a way that he can effectively put his brain on autopilot and motivate on autopilot. And again, I don't see people doing this as effectively as I think they could. Again, it's not just critics. It's not just other athletes that Michael gets motivation from. He's able to get motivation from the most random people. And I think that this is also a talent. I wanted to dive into a couple of these stories. I was told in Barcelona, and this was by one of the guys on our team, you'll never break 50 seconds. I didn't say anything back. Everyone would learn eventually that aside from losing itself, nothing made me more determined than when someone doubted me. I was in middle school, and I had a teacher say I'd never be successful. It's little things like that. Michael, not only does Miss Myers think you aren't doing a good job on your journals, but she thinks you simply can't do a better job on them. Now, what are you going to do about that? What we did was work on them some more. For hours after swim practice, we'd sit in front of the computer together. And my mom would help me to complete my journal. So it's not just doubters that really fire Michael up, but it's also people that challenge him. His mom was really effective at challenging him in this way. And that was something that could really get under his skin and light a fire under him. People around him were really great at framing things like they were a challenge, and he would absolutely eat that up. I thought this is probably the funniest story, and I really enjoyed this. This is from Bob's perspective. Michael says, remember that fundraiser we went to a couple months ago? Yes, I said, this time stringing out my reply. I couldn't tell where he was going. Remember how Miss Know-It-All had told me I could never win the 100 fly and I shouldn't even enter it? I nodded. A grin started to crease his face. Well, what's up now, Miss Know-It-All? And with that, he turned away and eased down the pool, a kid with another gold medal and seemingly one less worry in his head. As he moved further away, I thought, so that's what you were thinking about when you were racing for a gold medal. Some pesky lady back in Baltimore. So Michael is swimming for a gold medal, and he's thinking about some lady who's completely unimportant, but how she wronged him. And he's leveraging that into this motivation, this extra push in the gold medal. I absolutely love that. I think that skill of being able to, use anything and create this roaring fire inside of you is very, very skillful. And this is Michael talking about how people gave him motivation for free.
The French saying they were going to smash us like guitars in 2008. It's like all of those little things for me, if somebody ever has a doubt, I love it. All it's going to do is fuel me 100 times over.
All right, getting away from how Michael could use other people to motivate him, he could also use negative emotions and negative events to push his own buttons very effectively. This started at a pretty early age. Another encounter. I was about 11 or 12. We were at a swim meet. The older boys were about to dump my head in the toilet, give me a swirly, as they called it, until someone came in, maybe Bob, maybe another group of kids. I don't remember, and I escaped. I do remember this. I ran out of the bathroom in tears. My anger would build up inside me, and while I wouldn't say anything about it to anyone, I would use that anger as motivation, especially at the pool. At a swim meet in Princeton, New Jersey, a kid from Delaware beat me in the 200-yard freestyle race. This would have been just the sort of thing that typically would have sparked a first-class goggles throwing tantrum. Instead, I felt the burn inside, then let the emotion carry me through my next swims. At that meet, I had 5 more events. I won all 5. Looking back, I firmly believe these episodes taught me not just how to manage my emotions to my advantage. I also learned what was worth getting worked up about, what was meaningful and important in my life. And it follows naturally what was not. This is something I don't necessarily think is healthy long-term. I think learning to observe your emotions, learning to channel them can be effective. But if you find that anger is an incredible source of energy, you might be angry all the time. You might just stay angry. And I don't think that that necessarily is a good thing for your stress levels, for a lot of other things in the long term. As we've seen just from looking at Michael to this point, and there's still quite a few more things that can motivate him, there's a lot of different ways to motivate yourself. A lot of them can be positive. A lot of them don't necessarily have to be the negative or anger framing. Another thing that Michael does with these negative events is he's able to reframe in a very effective way. So there's 2 ways to look at hype and attention. You can look at it as negative, as pressure, or you can look at it as positive, as support. I got those lines from Ian Thorpe. In response to any question about attention, those lines served as his standard response. I don't look at it as pressure, only as expectations. But the only expectations I focus on are those I have for myself, because those are the only ones I can do something about. In practice, I sometimes pass the time doing laps by singing in my head the last song I heard in the car or on the way to the pool. I got that from Ian Thorpe. There was a lot I could learn from Ian Thorpe, the least of which had to do with swimming. I'd always looked up to Michael Jordan, the way he changed his sport, just the way I want to help change swimming. Ian in Australia and Michael Jordan, the man. So maybe that's a little bit off topic. Ian is the one that taught him to reframe these negative things as positive, reframe them as positive emotion. You can reframe anxiousness as excitement. You can change how the physical phenomenon of certain emotions are the exact same. And so it's up to you to decide whether something is anger or intensity or anxiousness or excitement. And Ian is clearly teaching Michael that lesson here. Something that snuck in there is how Michael is learning from these other people. He's learning from Ian Thorpe. He's learning from Michael Jordan. And that's something we observe in all these great athletes as well, is they're learning from the great ones before them. Another way of reframing is this. So at that point, I just wanted to get onto the team. I was going to have a loss. I started rationalizing, if only for an instant, better at trials than at the Olympics. As soon as I thought that, though, I thought this. One thing I'm sure good at is responding. He's changing the paradigm for himself. So someone could be down after a loss and say, oh, I'm not going to do well in the next race. Michael is saying, okay, I did lose. I can't change anything about that. If I look at my history, if I look at any of these things, I can spin this into a positive. The last truly effective way that I think Michael is able to motivate himself is for other people and essentially stealing motivation from other people. So if we're looking at for other people, his family, a lot of people around him were incredibly great motivating forces for him. So one person in particular, Whitney, his sister, that was really important. I was too excited and too young and too new to everything to find the words to tell her. If I hadn't seen her put in all that work, if I hadn't seen the sacrifices she made, and if I hadn't seen firsthand that you can't take success for granted, there's no way I could have been on that Olympic team. Every time I blew up at Bob or decided some level of extra effort wasn't necessary, I knew because of Whitney that I needed to blow off my steam and get back to work. Because if I wasn't willing to do that, somebody else certainly was, and he would kick my butt when he got in the pool. So Whitney, obviously his sister, who we talked about before, she couldn't make it into the Olympics. Her body broke down. Michael has this great opportunity to do all these things, and his sister kind of has to watch. And for Michael, it's every time he doesn't put his best effort in, it hurts double bad because he feels like he's squandering his opportunity that his sister worked so hard for, and she couldn't execute on. Another person that Michael played an important role in Michael's life was Stevie. So Stevie was a child who loved swimming, who unfortunately had a terminal illness. Stevie's surgery was on my mind that night and the next day at practice. How could I face the sort of thing that he had too? How bad is a bad day at the pool if you really think about it? So his last name was Hansen. At the Hansen's house, it was already after midnight. We stayed there for 2 hours, maybe longer. Stevie was only 11 and so desperately ill. But his fighting spirit, that's what had always impressed me about him. I sat there on Stevie's bed, holding his hand, just talking. He was sound asleep and didn't wake up. Even so, I was sure he could hear, which is what Stevie told his mom the next morning. I wish I had woken up, but I know he was here. Unfortunately, Stevie passed away shortly after this. And I don't think it's the role to have other people give you perspective. But I also think that it's something important for a lot of athletes to remember is that there's something bigger than them. Life and death is more important than the sports we work in. I think Michael, from getting close with Stevie and his family, was able to gain some perspective and really appreciate all the things that he had. And that's also a motivating force for him. And I think that we can do that all the time. Anyone can do that. Is if we really think about all the bad things that are going on in the world, all the sick people, all the opportunities that so many other people don't have, being grateful for the opportunities that we do have can fire us up. Because if we feel like we're squandering the things that we have when other people would die to be in the position that we have, it's a very powerful force in and of itself. Another person important in his life is his mom. So Michael was largely raised by his mother. His dad was in the picture, but his mom was really the one driving him to practice every day, essentially running the family. She's the one that got him into swimming in the first place. Because she largely raised him, he has a ton of respect for her and he wants to make her proud. He wants to do right by her as well. And then the last person he really is motivated by is his coach, Bob. Bob has put in all the hours. Bob has been there for literally pretty much every minute of Michael's swim career. And Bob is also an incredible motivating force that we'll talk about in episode 2 and 3. Michael is also not just motivated by these people, he's also motivated through other people kind of in a different way. And this is something I think we can all steal. So at the Beijing Olympics, USA Basketball all shows up to watch him swim. The only way we weren't going to win was if someone was disqualified for a false start. But could we break 7 minutes? I knew going into this final that I was going to swim fast. For one thing, I'd not gone as fast in the 200 fly as I'd wanted to because of an equipment malfunction. This relay was the next place to prove what I still had in me. For another, when I lead off a relay, I want to help my teammates by giving them open water. If they have open water, they're going to swim faster. Thirdly, I had not done what I'd wanted in my leadoff leg in the 800 relay at the Melbourne Worlds. I'd wanted to back up the 143.86 I'd had there in the open 200 with a similar swim, but instead I went a full second and a half slower, 145.36. I was still mad about that. And then looking up in the stands, we saw several of the stars of the US Olympic basketball team, including Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Chris Paul, Jason Kidd, and Carmelo Anthony. No way were we going to give it anything less than 100% with those guys on hand to watch, on deck. We could hear the crowd cheering. That was cool, those guys cheering for us. So Michael is motivated also by the greatness around him. He doesn't want to not give his best effort when other people who he knows also are pursuing the same types of things are giving their best effort and are there showing up. So Michael is getting inspiration. He's getting motivation from having these great people associated and watching his work. He's also motivated by his friends. He's also motivated by, I guess you'd call it, ideas. And I wanted to clarify what this meant. So Michael says, I was more than fired up. I'd gotten a text message that morning from back home from Troy Pusteri. When I was just starting out in North Baltimore, Troy was one of the older boys. He used to call me Little Phelps. Troy was always himself mentally tough too. He went on to become a Navy SEAL. Of all the messages I got from home during the course of the 2008 Olympics, Troy's was the only one I saved so that I could read it afterwards. Get fired, way, way up, time and time again. This is what it said. All right, brother man, last race. This one is not for you. It's for your fans like me, who you inspire every day for the last 6 years. It's for Bob and your mom. For without them, none of this would be possible. It's for the United States, the best damn country on the face of the earth. It's for history. So not only is Michael inspired by his friend who's a Navy SEAL, he's also inspired by his words. He's also inspired by doing something for history, for the United States of America, and all of these things. Another one is Michael really being inspired by the movie Miracle. I probably should watch it again. I saw it a long time ago, but I mean, he lives, breathes, and eats and sleeps this movie. And you can also get motivated by, I guess it's a similar vein. Miracle effectively is history, but Michael gets motivated from swimming history as well. Before the race, Eddie showed us a tape of the 800 relay final at the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. The US had led a dramatic race up into the last leg. In the last 200 meters, Germany's Michael Gross, the Olympic champ in the 200 free, spent all his energy to catch American Bruce Hayes in the first 50 meters. At that point, everyone had assumed the race was over. Instead, Hayes stayed with Gross until the last few strokes and passed him back just at the end of the race to give the US team the victory by 0.04 seconds, about the length of a toe. All of us know about that race. None of us knew how we would see a modern version of it happen before our eyes. So basically, they watch this video and then it happens to them. They win by a fingertip. The last way that Michael is able to motivate himself or is to find motivation is in rewards. I put this last because I think extrinsic rewards are the least sticky, the least effective way to motivate yourself, but they can work. For example, if you're working with little kids, sometimes you have to bribe them a little bit until they realize that they love to do it themselves. I still think a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic rewards are very effective. A future episode, I'll go in depth into intrinsic versus extrinsic reward and goal setting. I have to find the right guest for that. But if you know anyone, please let me know. Our deal was that anytime I broke one of those world records, I could buy something nice for myself. Usually that meant something adding to the Escalade. After one record, I bought spinners for my rims, which I really loved. I got a kick out of watching people stare at the spinning rims after the car stops. I think it's hilarious that Michael bought spinners for his car. There's one interview that I watched, and this is deep in the archives, but basically it's when he was 19 and he pulls up and the rims keep spinning and he's like standing like a tough guy in the parking lot. And I really enjoy that. I think everyone should go and find it. Again, this is extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. I think overly extrinsic motivation is okay as long as it's balanced by the intrinsic motivation overall. Going back through the section, obviously a lot there. I maybe went a little too in depth into some of these stories where Michael is really motivating himself in unique ways. But I think getting into his mind and seeing how he can use all these different forces is something that we can use every single day. There has to be something in everyone's life, almost in every day that we have, that can motivate us, to push us. We can start, looking at news articles. We can start putting quotes up. We can start reminding ourselves constantly of the things that push us forward. The second to last section, we're going to touch on innovation and strategy. So what are the technologies that Michael is using to get ahead? What is he doing structurally that's different to get ahead as well? Something that is meaningful to me is that if you want to get different results than other people, you have to approach things different than other people. And I think Michael was a big proponent of that. So we talked before about how he was swimming every day. That's something that his peers were not doing. And that's a way that he was able to get ahead. No one had ever swum as many events as he did in 2008. So he swam 17 individual races, which is a lot. And in order to do that, he had to do some things differently. This is him talking about those experiences.
I got 52 extra days each year than anybody else had. And in the sport of swimming, if you miss one day, it takes you 2 days to get back to where you were. So Everybody else is taking a step back on Sunday when they weren't swimming, and I was taking that one step forward. So for me, that's really all it was. I was willing, I think, to make sacrifices. The greats do things when they don't always want to.
Something that he also mentions is the sacrifice. So doing things that he didn't always want to do. Part of getting ahead, part of innovating is sometimes, swimming upstream and doing things that other people are not willing to do. That is a different path that a lot of people don't take. And if you have the capacity to do that, that might be a way to get ahead. Another way that Michael was able to get ahead was through trial and error. This is something I think is really important. A lot of the time, if you've reached a sufficiently high level, you don't want to lose any ground. But in order to lose ground, in order to get better, sometimes you have to get a little worse. Sometimes you have to try and iterate and experiment with new things. This is Michael talking about his experience with experimentation.
2002 to 2008 was basically trial and error. So for me, in 2002, that's really when I started amping up my event schedule, where I was swimming 4 to 5 individual events and having a couple relays at Pan Pacs, World Championships, major international competitions throughout that time frame. Because at that time, at the Olympic Games, that's where I think the real truth comes out. Because I think there are a lot of people who are very talented who can make it there. There are very few people who can deal with the pressure and the stress that happens when we're there.
So in order for Michael to achieve the 8 golds in 2008, I think this was only accomplished through iteration. Bob, his coach, and Michael try to get better every race. They try to work on individual things. They're constantly iterating and improving. And from 2002 all the way to 2008, they finally reach what's close to a finished product. Michael, without a doubt, had to be willing to try and fail in order to get better. And although he didn't fail that often, he did fail enough to be able to learn enough to get better. Michael also had some unique aspects of technique in which he was able to innovate and leverage his own personal strengths to really dominate. Here's Michael talking about the dolphin kick.
Try to do it the last 15 meters, but you can't take a breath. So I've been trying a little by little. I did it 100 the first night. I tried to do it a little bit last night at 200. And we're in a close race, and I wanted to see how much of a difference it really makes.
So the dolphin kick is something that you can use off the wall, and you can go 15 meters. So Michael would use this off the wall later in his career, and he was unbelievably fast swimming the stroke. So he could pick up a lot of speed and distance off of the wall in every stroke. And if he got good at dolphin kick, he could use that in every single race. And so he was able to cultivate that. And that was largely the difference between 2004 and 2008. I'm not necessarily a swimming expert. Hopefully I talked to a swimming expert on this podcast during part of this series. But I'd love to learn about some of the intricacies associated with that. The dolphin kick also was something that was made a lot stronger by Michael lifting weights outside of the pool. This was related to timing. So sometimes technique and timing don't necessarily match up. So Michael maybe needed the prerequisite strength to make this dolphin kick very effective. And he didn't develop that until his body was mature enough to be lifting weights. I saw another example of this. Latke, he does this upside down, and his unique biomechanics allow him to swim more efficiently upside down because I think when he kicks, he naturally would push to the surface. So by him going upside down, he pushes himself down. It's a very interesting thing. This is a unique competitive advantage that is based on his own physiology as well. They actually made that illegal for a point of time, and then they made it back legal again. Another area that Michael was innovating, especially for the time, was in biofeedback. He says, if I could do 405 at the trials, I thought maybe I could do 403. My lactate response after 405 proved perfectly normal, which made me think I'd had racing heartbeat beforehand, yet I had thrown down a world record. And immediately afterward, the blood work showed that I was completely back to normal, which made me also think that it's all in how you respond to pressure. I also knew there were things that I could fix to get me to 403. I knew my breaststroke could be faster. I knew I could go out harder on the fly and still be relaxed. So Michael is evaluating his performance against a physiological baseline, which is his blood lactate. I thought this was really interesting. I didn't know how common this was in swimming. But apparently that's how a lot of swimmers evaluate their capacity for stress and hard work on their muscles. And Michael was using this religiously to prepare for the 2008 Olympics. And he was using this as a baseline to figure out how much he could swim and how much he needed to cool down. I thought this was really interesting. I wonder if other sports use this as effectively. This would be pretty interesting to explore across other domains. I want to talk a little bit more about these lactate tests. He says, in fact, I'd gone to meet Bob and told him I feel awful. A few minutes later, I had definitive proof. I did feel awful. My lactate test said so. When you do anything physical like swimming, and particularly if you're swimming all out, the exertion creates lactic acid. In scientific circles, there's controversy over whether lactic acid itself is the thing that drags down athletic performance, or whether other stuff within the body signaled by elevated levels of lactic acid causes fatigue. It doesn't matter to us swimmers. What matters is that we're constantly tested to see the rate in which we can clear lactate from our systems, because that indicates our ability to recover. That's why at most top meets, moments after a race, you can see a parade of swimmers lining up for individual lactate tests. So something I thought was interesting about this, or a thought that came into my mind, is that, are you bad, or are you in poor condition, or is it something else? So Michael is physically in poor condition. You can evaluate if your results are because of that, or if you're just not good enough. Those are two different things. And the more data you have, the more data you can collect, you can evaluate if it's you that's the problem, or if there's extenuating circumstances that are the problem. How you attribute failure or success is important. So if you went out and failed, but essentially everything went against you, just nothing went your way, you shouldn't blame yourself, right? If you went out and you performed badly because of things you could control, that's when you should take blame. And the more data you collect, the more you analyze these things, the more clear that distinction becomes. This is the last I'll talk about lactate, I promise. The swims are held in a separate pool just steps away from the competition pool. Ideally, you're taking the lactate test 3 minutes after leaving the competition pool, and then it's into the warm down pool. The lactate test tells me how long I need to swim down. Typically, it's between 17 and 22 minutes. My lactate reading after the prelim 400 IM read 12.3. Super high, nerves, I guess. I had no other explanation. I remember feeling momentarily flustered. Why was my lactate so high? I had a long swim down to think about it. The new era of a lot of training is training based on data feedback. So people wear a Whoop, people wear an Oura ring, people have a lot of technology, and they're able to train to the proper level based on their current recovery. It seems like in swimming, they were doing this a little while before. And I think that that's pretty cool. Now we have a lot more new tools and technologies, and I obviously believe in them. I have worn both an Oura and a Whoop, and I think they're good products. They help me train more effectively. Although, as you can see, I'm not training quite as much as I used to. Another way that Michael collects data is through journaling. So this is him talking about how useful this data from journaling is for him.
But like for me, my biggest thing that I like to do is journaling, because I want to get everything out, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. I don't care. It's on paper. I can go back to that day to be able to make steps forward, right? Like I can learn from everything that I've done in my past, but I can't do that unless I'm journaling everything that's happened.
I think it's interesting that he wants to correlate everything. A lot of people think data is just these quantitative measures, but they can also be qualitative things about how you feel. And you can start looking at any of this text data or any of this other data that you're putting down and creating trends and patterns. I think a lot of the great athletes do that. A lot of the great athletes journal. Michael Phelps, obviously, Serena Williams, and there's quite a few others that have found journaling and this data collection to be very powerful tools in their arsenal. This is Michael talking about how data is integrated into his everyday life, particularly sleep.
I want to know my data. I'm big on sleep. I want to know my percents, REM, deep, light. I want to know, I want to try to hit those 20% barriers. That's for me, in deep and REM, I want 20% every night. For me, if I'm 20% every night, I know I'm the best me every single day, no matter what. Dehydration is something that's huge. I mean, I had COVID, so the numbers that I had from COVID were wild. My heart rate was up 10 beats. My skin temperature was off 5 degrees. I just want to know what I'm doing, and I want to be able to give myself the best chance to be the best me.
I thought just him talking in depth about his sleep and talking about the data that he uses and and what could impact his sleep quality was particularly interesting. Michael has also been an innovator on the technology side of things. In 2008, their Speedo released a new swimsuit called the LZR Racer. I think it's a laser racer. So essentially a lot of record times were broken in the suit, and they eventually did make it illegal. But Michael is one of the people wearing the suits. He was sponsored by Speedo. Essentially everyone was wearing these suits, but they clearly made a difference. And essentially they use these special water repellent fabrics that made the athletes super fast. I don't need to go too deep into the controversy or any of these types of things, but if there's something that can make you better and it's within the confines of the rules, it doesn't hurt to try to use it. Michael has also been an investor and heavily involved with a lot of different companies. So as I mentioned, Whoop before, Michael, I believe, is an ambassador and possibly an investor in them. He's been on their podcast. I've seen a lot of content with him. I am not sponsored by them at all. If you would like a Whoop, though, I do have an affiliate code in the description and in the show notes. I really like mine. I would love to have anyone from them come on and talk about the product. Sounds very interesting to me. But again, not sponsored. I am just a user of this product. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how Michael viewed recovery. Something that Michael was doing, he was also doing regular blood work a lot of the time. So not just the lactate test, he's getting a lot of biometric data. And here's Bob, his coach, talking about that.
We're able to do regular blood work so that we're getting a CBC and training markers, CK, cortisol, those sort of things. And we actually did adjust training according to those. I think that's very valuable. If you can have that blood chemistry, learn that we needed to supplement iron sometimes, vitamin D all the time.
And then finally, I thought this was pretty interesting. I just wanted to dive into some of Michael's favorite recovery techniques, not necessarily directly related to technology, but there's a lot of different things he's doing to keep his body finely tuned. And here's him talking about that.
Graston, cupping, and cold tub. I'm in the process of putting a cold tub at my house. So when that happens, it'll be every day. Every single morning when I wake up, I jump in a cold shower.
So I actually didn't know what Graston was. So apparently it's like very deep tissue massage, but maybe something worth giving a try. There wasn't anything too out there. There wasn't any red light therapy or things along those lines. But in the current world, I think people are really pushing the limits, and there's a lot of new and interesting technologies, hopefully we'll cover in this podcast, that are changing the game for a lot of people. And then finally, here's Michael talking about LeBron.
He's asking his body to do so much at such a high level. It's like you have to treat it like it should be treated, right? You have to give it everything it needs.
So I see a big parallel with how LeBron takes care of his body. There's a great interview with LeBron and Coach K, where LeBron talks about his dedication to his body, how much money he's putting into his body every year. As I've gotten older, as I've done this podcast, as I've learned a lot more, I'm more and more impressed with the athletes who have a tremendous amount of longevity. I think athletes that can sustain high performance for a long period of time, that is a skill in and of itself. And that takes so much dedication, so much work. A lot of guys can be good for a short period of time, but to be great for a long period of time is a completely different battle. And it's something I have an incredible amount of respect for. So as we go on to this final section of curiosity, I'm interested in, one, are you using data to get better? I don't think you have to be a data nerd to collect data on yourself, to be able to journal, to look at trends in your performance. And I think that is an important skill that can take people pretty far. If you're not super data centric, you can have someone else do this for you. In my main work, this is literally what I do. I'm taking data for professional athletes and I'm helping them leverage it effectively. I'm helping teams use this data effectively. The coaches, the players, they don't have to be familiar with it. They can outsource it to someone like myself. I'll also say, what is your strategy? What ways are you innovating? Are you doing things that other people are not? I would maybe write a list of things down that you would like to try that are different from the norm. Even if they don't work, it's still worth trying the sacrifice and the practice of taking risks. Now, I wanted to end with curiosity. I think that this is very aligned with the overarching theme of the podcast. We're curious about who the greatest athletes are and what made them successful. Michael Phelps was very much the same. He was constantly asking why and he wanted to know a lot of answers. We saw a direct parallel with Roger Federer as well. So I think it was Paul Annacone, Pete Sampras and Roger Federer's coach. They called Federer Mr. Y because he would just keep asking why. And Michael has the same mindset. And this started at a young age. So on the days I worked with Tom, I'd start looking at the clock and calculating split times in my head. Let's see. If a guy wants to swim X, that means he has to hit the 50-yard mark in Y. My mom realized I was getting serious when I started talking about tenths of seconds and negative splitting. So he's interested in swimming. He's curious about negative splitting, all these very specific swim type terms. He says, I've always admired other athletes, both in and out of my sport. When I started swimming, I was a huge fan of Pablo Morales. He was the Olympic champion in the butterfly, and he was very friendly with fans and people in the swimming world. So Pablo Morales was obviously one of the first inspirations for him. Ian Thorpe was an inspiration for him. There were so many other athletes he was able to look up to and learn from. Outside of swimming, how can you not be in awe of Michael Jordan? I don't know that anyone has ever made people appreciate his sport more simply by playing it better than anyone else. Basketball just looks like a better game when he plays it. The last few years, I've become a huge Ravens fan, and I love watching Ray Lewis put a big hit on somebody. This is Michael talking about his inspiration from Michael Jordan and his inspiration from other great athletes overall.
Being around greatness like that, it's not something you get to do every single day. So, looking up to Jordan, that was my guy. Like that was the reason why I did what I did. I wanted to change the sport of swimming because of him. He changed the sport of basketball and how people look at it.
And finally, I wanted to end the show with another great quote from Michael Phelps. He talks about how cool it would be to get together with other great athletes.
I think it would be pretty interesting if we all did get together and just pick each other's mind to see how close we actually are alike. I would guarantee that we all have a lot of things in common, and the way that we tick and the way our mind works is probably pretty similar. I think with our work ethic and the things that we do to be able to compete how we do, we have to have some similarities.
So the biggest thing I took away from this, again, this is the point of the podcast, is that there's probably a lot of similarities between these great athletes. Can we analyze them? Can we consolidate them? And can we learn from each of these athletes? What are the common trends that made all of them great? And then maybe what are the individual things, the individual philosophies that were different among these great athletes that might be successful for us? Probably those differences are differences related to the sports, differences related to the personalities. But I believe that we can steal these things and use them for ourselves, whether in sports, most likely in sports as an athlete or coach, or as someone who's trying to dominate whatever field they're in. So we covered a lot of tools that Michael Phelps used to dominate swimming. So the first is goal setting. The second is dedication tools. So commitment and rituals. We touched on visualization. So seeing success before it happens, but also profiling and outlining failure and figuring out ways to reconcile it. We touched on game time tools. So before, during, and after the race. We touched on adversity, ways Michael found motivation, innovation, technology, and strategy, and finally on curiosity. Part 2 dives into Bob Bowman, Michael Phelps' coach, his golden rules, his framework for what made Michael the swimmer that he was. Obviously, Michael played a huge part in that, but this is very focused on Bob Bowman and his approach to getting the most out of Michael. In part 3, we're going to touch on Michael and Bob's relationship and what I believe and what the research suggests the role of a coach is. Bob and Michael is one of the most successful coaching relationships of all time. And I'm really excited to explore that relationship, what we can learn to do and maybe learn what not to do. Part 4 is all about athletes and mental health. So Michael, although he was the greatest Olympian of all time, he did struggle with mental health. He has struggled with depression. He made some decisions he wasn't proud of. And that isn't unique just to him. I think there are a lot of athletes who either retire or get injured or achieve their dreams and they're just unhappy. And I think it's important for us to discuss that and think about that. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you think it would be helpful to a friend, please share it. That is my only ask of you. I would also love it if you follow me on socials. If there's any way I can improve this podcast, if there's any questions, if you have any thoughts, you can access me on Twitter, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. I will leave all those in the show notes in the description. And again, I would love any feedback, any ways that I can improve the show. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm excited for us to continue to pursue greatness together.